Chapter 259. The letter also mentioned that Tilly was trying to translate these words, and wanted to see if the Witch Cooperation Association had any clues. Roland decided to reply to the other side with the news of the devil and the holy city of Tequila, and also sent Soroya's restored photos of the scene. Maybe it would be helpful for her translation. This kind of information was not suitable to be hidden. The earlier they could understand the changes of more than 400 years ago, the earlier they could make preparations, and maybe they could also find the church's weakness. If they had no scruples, there was no need to bury all the past history in the ground. Obviously, there were some things they wanted to avoid being known. In addition, it was best to send someone to check the stone tower in the concealing forest. The ruins of the eastern sea wind region were blocked by the church, and the fjord's stone island was immersed in the sea all year round. Except for a pile of books in the secret room, there was almost nothing left. The depths of the concealing forest were inaccessible, even the church couldn't easily reach there. Maybe they could find some useful clues. However, the Devil in Lightning's report also made him very afraid. This kind of action could not be done without witches, but if there was a loss of witches, any one of them would be hard for Roland to accept. After thinking it over, he decided to wait until the army was equipped with a new generation of firearms, and then directly go to the forest with the witches to deal with the possible appearance of the devil. Roland suppressed the uneasiness in his heart, revealing a reluctant smile. I understand Tilly's matter. I will write back and explain to her. The next step is to complete the ability test. After all, taking advantage of peaceful times to develop and strengthen their strength as soon as possible was the right thing to do. When the inevitable war came, at least he would have the power to fight. The test site was chosen outside the town's walls. In order to not let the fugitives stray into the test site, Roland also mobilized the first army to isolate the surrounding area. The first to be tested was Lotus. Her age was similar to Nightingale. She had short black curly hair, and her facial features belonged to the type of a pretty daughter from a humble family, appearing very delicate. Her height was not high, only about 1.5 meters, and her body was thin. Compared to the tall Nightingale, she simply looked like a little girl who had not yet fully developed, giving people a feeling of weakness. However, her ability wasn't weak at all. Within a range of 5 meters, she could easily change the terrain beneath her feet. The description in the letter was far less shocking than when he saw it with his own eyes. During the test, Lotus made the ground beside her rise vertically, as if it was an earth pillar that reached the sky. Only when it was about 7 or 8 meters high did this towering earth pillar collapse due to structural instability. According to her, the looser the ground, the less magic power it would take to transform it. But similarly, if the geology was too poor, the strength of the houses and walls built would also be very low. If the main composition of the ground was gravel, it would be very difficult to create anything decent. Obviously, she could only change the terrain, but not the material of the ground. Of course, this problem could be solved by expanding the growth range and thickness. Roland also asked her to demonstrate how to build a house. However, the soil in the western region was obviously not as dense as that in Sleeping Island. The mud house that rose from the ground collapsed several times when there were windows and doors left. In the end, they had to increase the thickness of the walls to about 0.5 meter. After the completion of the house, it was as simple and crude as a cave. It could only serve the most basic living functions. Compared to the orderly layout and compact structure of the brick house, it was much worse. But then again, even the worst cave house was better than a wooden shed that was leaking everywhere. At least in winter, a brazier and a brick bed could keep the house warm. If it was too late to build enough brick houses before the arrival of the months of the demons, they could make do with this kind of house. The last step was a comprehensive test. Lotus' ability was a typical summoning ability, without any branch ability. She could shape the terrain within a range of 5 meters from herself. When she used it, it was very easy to be affected by the god's stone of retaliation, but the formed ground would not shrink back. How is her magic power level? Roland asked. A brown cyclone with a very dense center. Among the witches, it's a very good level, Nightingale thought for a moment. It's close to Leaf's. What about the consumption rate? Upgrading the soil floor is still okay. She looked at the raised stone wall at the foot of the North Slope mountain. When transforming the rock, the consumption of magic power is very fast. I'm afraid it can only last for 1 or 2 hours. Roland nodded. Leaf's magic power was ranked 3rd in the Witch Union, 2nd only to Anna and Soroya. But having enough magic power was the prerequisite for continuous use of her ability. Of course, there were also low-consumption abilities like Nightingale and Lightning, which could be maintained for a whole day without any difficulty. After recording this information in his notebook, he began the second witch's test. Who wants to come? Me. Honey raised her hand. Roland raised the corner of his mouth. Then show me your ability first. The girl called Honey was also not tall, she was even a bit shorter than Lotus. Last winter, she had just become an adult, and her temperament looked very lively. Her short, fluffy brown hair was curled up like a fried dough twist. Her skin color was slightly darker, and around her neck, wrists, and ankles she wore a chain made of animal teeth. Her main ability was animal language, which could take effect on animals within the range of her ability. All kinds of animals that had been tamed by magic would carry out her instructions, but the range of the instructions could not exceed the animal's ability. After the task was completed, the taming would be cancelled, or she would take the initiative to cancel it. In addition, Honey also had a very interesting branch ability, Animal Messenger. She could pass the taming command to the target animal through the messenger animal. For example, she could summon a bird and let it find a more powerful animal to serve. Perhaps it was an old cat, or perhaps it was a fierce goshawk. This process was completely out of control, and the final result was also full of uncertainty. However, whether it was the main ability or the branch ability, they would all be affected by the God's Stone of Retaliation, especially the Animal Messenger, which could be directly erased by the God's Stone of Retaliation, allowing the animal to regain its freedom. In addition, the larger the tamed animal, the more magic power it would consume. In her own words, she could summon dozens of birds at the same time, but if the target was a cow, she could only control 2 or 3. The third witch to be tested was Evelyn. She was about 25 or 26 years old, with a standard King City accent, which sounded especially amiable. On the list sent by Tilly, it was written that she could transform poor quality ale into other drinks with completely different styles and tastes, as long as she had tasted it before. As for this witch, Roland's purpose from the beginning was very obvious, that was to purify alcohol. Since she could turn watered ale into delicious wine or fruit wine, surely white wine shouldn't be a problem, right? For this reason, Roland had carefully prepared several bottles of packaged wine, the concentration of which ranged from 50% to 95%. It was a bit spicy, but it wouldn't be a problem if she only drank 1 or 2 mouthfuls. The key was to make her agree that this transparent liquid that burned her throat was indeed a kind of wine. However, the scorching sun in the wilderness wasn't a good place to taste wine. Without delicious side dishes, ice cubes, and crystal wine glasses, if he directly took out the pungent smell of white wine, others might even misunderstand it as poison. He intended to slowly influence her during dinner, so after simply asking Evelyn a few questions, he directly jumped to the next witch. Chapter 260. The fourth was Sylvie. In front of this witch, Roland always felt a little uncomfortable. It wasn't because Nightingale said that she lied too much. In modern society, except for relatives and good friends, few people would speak frankly. He had long been accustomed to all kinds of special effects of flattery and rumors. He just felt that in front of her, he had a feeling that he had nowhere to hide. What was worse, he knew that this was not an illusion, but the other party's ability. Her vision could ignore obstacles. As long as she wanted to, the clothes on her body were as good as nothing. Roland secretly lamented why he didn't have such an ability. He couldn't help but change his sitting position, crossing his legs. In terms of appearance, she could be regarded as the most unique of the 5 witches. She had long green hair that fell straight to her shoulders, and slender eyebrows that were faintly discernible under her bangs. Her amber eyes were so transparent that there was almost no depth to them. It was as if they were mirrors that reflected all the light outside. After looking at them for a long time, Roland always felt that a red mark would suddenly appear inside them. Sylvie's ability was very easy to understand. She could see everything around her, even behind her, and her vision could penetrate obstacles. The specific depth of vision depended on her thoughts. In addition, she also had a branch ability similar to Nightingale's. She could see the gathering and dissipation of magic. This made Roland feel a little surprised. If the branch ability could be so close, then what about the main ability? He asked Sylvie this question, but the latter hesitated and said that among the hundreds of witches on Sleeping Island, there was no one with the same ability. Nightingale gently pinched his left side to verify that this sentence was true. Perhaps it's because there are too few samples, Roland thought. The last witch to appear was Candle. She, like Anna, had ushered in her day of adulthood during the months of demons last year. When she was a minor, her ability could only be used on illuminating objects such as candles, lamp oil, and torches. After adulthood, her magic was stabilized, and the effect was greatly enhanced. She could maintain the original characteristics of the objects she touched for a period of time. For example, after casting the ability on an ice cube, it would not melt under the sun, and would still emit bursts of cold air. At first glance, this ability seemed incredible, and could achieve many things that could not be done by conventional means. However, after several rounds of testing, Roland found that it was not as perfect as he had imagined. First of all, it was a kind of enchantment ability, which required direct contact with the target. This limitation made it difficult for Candle to solidify some high-temperature objects. As a result, his plan to obtain a drop of molten steel that was always in a state of incandescence and could provide a continuous source of heat for the blast furnace failed. Apart from Anna, no one dared to touch something that was thousands of degrees Celsius with their hands. But if it became a thin wire, Candle could hold the other end and enchant it, but this led to another problem. That was, the farther the solidified state of the object was from its normal state, the greater the consumption of magic, and the shorter the duration of the effect. Roland used ice cubes to verify this point. After solidifying 2 ice cubes of the same size, one was placed on the hot ground, and the other was thrown into a basin of water. The former only persisted for half an hour before it quickly melted, while the latter still maintained its original shape even after the water temperature dropped to ice cold. This meant that if it was replaced with red-hot wire or steel, the effect would only be worse. Finally, the size was also a factor that restricted Candle's ability. Just like Hummingbird and Mystery Moon, the larger the object, the more magic it consumed. And according to Nightingale's observation, her own magic was in the lower middle level, like a golden mist, and had not yet formed a strong cyclone. But even so, this seemingly introverted girl was still Roland's biggest gain. In the field of industrial production, the solidified state of the object could be called a priceless treasure. The key lies in the word, normal state. Under the influence of heating, cooling, friction, force, and other factors, the metal would fatigue, and the structure would deform. He didn't need a drill that would become hot because of friction, nor did he need gears that were increasingly worn out. If the key parts of a machine could always be maintained in normal state, it meant that it could always maintain the highest efficiency and the highest precision. In other words, the burning flame could effectively improve the mechanical strength of inferior metals. Returning to the castle office, Roland once again browsed through the recorded abilities, and then began to plan the content of their future work. "How is it?" Nightingale poked her head out of the fog. "Among these 5 witches, is there anyone you particularly like?" "All of them are not bad," Roland casually replied. "What? You like all of them?" He glared at the other, who stuck out her tongue and walked away with a piece of dried fish in her mouth. Obviously, at present, the most useful ones were Lotus and Candle. With the ability to transform the terrain, he could easily build a new earthen wall outside the city wall. In order to save materials and speed up the construction period, he chose to build the original rubble cement wall at the foot of the northern slope mountain, which was the closest pass to the Redwater River. Although this could be completed before the arrival of the months of demons, at the same time it also limited the scope of the town's westward expansion. With the continuous increase in population, the development of this wilderness and the concealing forest was only a matter of time. The new earthen wall would extend to the outer edge of the concealing forest, and at the same time include a part of the forest, so that the town would nearly double the area. As for the lengthening of the line of defense, it could be solved by expanding the source of soldiers and artificially guiding the direction of the demonic beast's attack. In any case, compared with last year's wooden spears and preloaded flintlocks, the current firepower of the First Army had undergone earth-shaking changes, and the defensive measures such as the battery and the redoubt could also be completed with the help of the new city wall. In addition, he also intended to let Lotus open a passage in the southern mountains, so that border town could directly reach the ford. In this way, the town would be able to obtain a natural harbor, and trade with the fjords would also be more convenient. Taking into account the huge magic consumption of transforming the rock formation, this project might take several months. Candle's job was to cooperate with Anna and Lucia to create a new generation of machine tools for the production of firearms and other mechanical equipment. If everything went well, Anna could also be freed from the tedious processing and production. Sylvie's task was very clear, mainly to explore the northern slope mine and the concealing forest. According to the miners, the northern slope mine had more than 100 natural caves, and no one knew where they ultimately led. So far, they had mined and cleared only 20 tunnels, but they had already found several kinds of ores. Roland was very curious about the credibility of the so-called ancient monster's lair. Now that he had a witch with the ability to see through things, he wanted to completely explore the northern slope mine, draw a detailed map, and let Lotus cooperate to adjust the terrain to improve the efficiency of mining. Chapter 261. As the sun set in the west, the rolling heat began to subside, and the cicadas that had been chirping all day also gradually quieted down. However, compared to Sleeping Island, which was surrounded by the sea, the castle was still a bit stuffy. Evelyn, covered in sweat, walked to the second floor. When she opened the bedroom door, a chill suddenly enveloped her. Today's test was very hard, a mature and capable woman with black hair said with a smile. How was it? Did it go well? Her name was Scroll, and she was the oldest witch in the Witch Cooperation Association. She was also a very kind senior. She had only known her for a short day, but she had already felt the care and concern of the other. I don't know, Evelyn replied with some frustration. Everyone else used their own abilities, but when it was my turn, His Highness only asked me a few questions and then let me go. Is it because he thinks I'm useless? Scroll brought over a glass of ice water. There is no useless ability, only undeveloped ability. This is what His Highness Roland often said to us, so you don't have to worry about this. But... She took the glass, wanting to say something but hesitating. Worried that you won't be useful and will be left out in the cold? Scroll couldn't help but laugh. If it was the previous Witch Cooperation Association, it would be possible, but in Border Town, His Highness has never treated any witch differently, this hummingbird can testify. The girl who was buried in the closet looking for clothes looked up. That's roughly the case. Like me, Mystery Moon, Lily, and Miss Nana recently have nothing to do. His Highness even encouraged us to play Gwent cards to relieve our boredom. Relieve boredom? Evelyn stared. Well, incredible, right? Work hard when you have something to do, play happily when you have nothing to do, that's what he said. Hummingbird paused, but I think His Highness is still a little biased. He obviously treats Anna better. She was the first witch he knew, so his feelings for her were naturally much deeper. Scroll knocked on her head. Quickly clean your clothes, there won't be much water left later. Then she looked at Evelyn. You should also come with us. Where? The latter was stunned. To take a shower, Scroll smiled. In this season of summer, there is nothing more pleasant than standing under the shower. When Evelyn followed the two into the bathroom, she couldn't help but cry out in surprise. It was as if she had walked into a vast grassland. In front of her was a sea of clouds and mountains. The afterglow of the setting sun shone through the window and reflected on the wall, dyeing the clouds with a touch of gold. This is Soroya's masterpiece, Scroll laughed. This isn't a traditional decorative painting, you'll know when you take off your shoes. Evelyn carefully placed the wooden sandals in the shoe cabinet by the door. When she stepped on the grassland, barefoot, she immediately understood what Linley meant. The soles of his feet felt like lush green grass, and the tips of the grass were full of water droplets, as if it had just rained heavily. Scroll took off her clothes and let go of her ponytail, letting her long black hair cascade down. She walked to the wall and twisted the wrench. The shower head above her head suddenly sprayed out dozens of water lines, enveloping her. "How is it?" "Very convenient, right?" Hummingbird placed a round object in her hands. "This is a bath product invented by His Highness. It feels great when used with a shower. Come, I'll teach you how to use it." When Evelyn returned to the room again, her whole body felt lighter. She had never experienced such a comfortable bath before. When she rubbed the soap on her body and washed it away with water, the sticky feeling on her body was immediately swept away, replaced by a refreshing and smooth feeling. After changing into clean clothes, the stuffy air seemed to cool down. When she lifted her arms, she could still smell the lingering scent of roses on her skin. Is this the daily life of a witch cooperation association witch? Evelyn still couldn't believe it. She was born in the outer city of King's City, and her family ran a tavern. Although most of the guests were farmers, their topics of conversation were always about the nobles in the inner city and their extravagant lifestyle. She had heard a lot of wine when she served the guests. For example, the golden bathtub filled with wine, and the milk bathtub sprinkled with rose petals. But even in their marvelous rumors, none of them could compare to her personal experience today. At least, Evelyn didn't think that bathing with wine and milk would be very comfortable. Thinking that the owner of the castle was a real prince, it was normal for him to pay attention to comfort and enjoyment. But the witches actually lived the same life as the royal family, which was simply unimaginable for her. One must know that before going to Sleeping Island, even maintaining an ordinary and peaceful life was an extravagant hope. "Are you hungry?" Scroll dried her hair and rebraided it. "It's almost time to eat, let's go to the hall." In the living room on the first floor, a long square wooden table was already filled with all kinds of dishes. Evelyn roughly counted, there were 6 plates of meat, as well as egg custard, vegetable soup, and roasted mushrooms. It was no worse than last night's welcome banquet. After waiting for the other witches to arrive, everyone started to eat. She noticed that in addition to knives and forks, some people also used a pair of wooden sticks to pick up the food. His Royal Highness himself was the same, he rarely even picked up a knife and fork, the wooden stick in his hand flew up and down, looking very flexible. There were also no large pieces of steaks or whole chickens or ducks in the food bowls. Unlike the common food in the tavern, the steak was cut into small pieces, and the wild boar leg was removed from the bones, and was directly put into the mouth. When the dinner came to an end, His Royal Highness suddenly clapped his hands. "I've recently researched 2 new things, and I intend to promote them as products, but I'm not sure how effective they will be. I want you to try them first, and if you have any opinions, you can put them forward." "What are they?" "Food." "Okay. I want to try them." "And me, goo." The witches of the Witch Cooperation Association suddenly cheered. Evelyn blankly looked at Scroll, and the latter explained with a smile, "His Royal Highness often invents some novel things, such as the soap you used before, as well as perfume, chopsticks, ice cream. Before he officially puts them into production, he will let us try them first." Ahem, the prince cleared his throat. "The first thing is white wine. Compared to common ale and fruit wine, it has a mellow taste, and is more likely to get people drunk, so underage witches are not allowed to participate." "Your Royal Highness, this is prejudice." Lightning shouted, "I can drink more than those adult sailors." "That's still not okay." "Well." The little girl pouted, but Roland remained unmoved, and ordered the attendants to serve the white wine and distribute it to the adult witches. In front of Evelyn, there were also 3 glasses, and they were all filled with different kinds of wine. One glass was transparent and colorless, just like clear water, one glass was milky white, and the last glass was a sparkling orange-yellow. Under the flickering candlelight, they could also see some small floating objects, which looked like unfiltered fruit wine. They are white wine mixed with apple juice, white wine mixed with milk, and pure white wine, Roland introduced. You can add ice according to your own taste, the more you add, the lighter the taste of the wine. Then he smiled at Evelyn. You have been in King City's tavern, and your ability is to brew different kinds of wine, so I hope to hear your evaluation of this new wine. Evelyn's heart couldn't help but thump twice. She picked up the glass filled with orange wine and took a sip. Sure enough, as His Royal Highness had said, the taste of white wine was far stronger than that of ale. It was even a little sharp to the throat, and the tip of her tongue felt a trace of bitterness, but the fragrance of the apple diluted its influence, and finally the wine itself was mellow. Several flavors lingered in her mouth. It was the first time she had tasted such an excellent wine. The white wine mixed with milk was more gentle, and the bitterness had almost disappeared. She could taste, in addition to milk, there should also be some honey or sugar. The sweetness and the aroma of the wine mixed together, forming a new kind of taste. When it came to the last glass, Evelyn was already full of expectation. She took a small sip, and the burning feeling suddenly rolled over the base of her tongue and throat, just as she had expected, without the interference of other tastes. Only the pure taste of wine was left. First it was hot, and then under the bitterness there was a sweetness. The taste of these 3 glasses of wine is unforgettable. She put down the glass and took a breath. Your Royal Highness, some people may not be able to accept its strong and stimulating taste, but I think people who really love to drink should not be able to resist having such a mellow wine fragrance. Is that so? Roland laughed. That's good, but this glass is not the strongest white wine. I can still further enhance its mellow flavor. When the time comes you can taste it again. Did he choose me to come here to test his new wine? Although Evelyn was a little confused, she still answered, Yes, Your Royal Highness. After the wine glasses and plates were removed, His Royal Highness ordered the attendants to bring a pile of boxes, and then placed them on the long table. This is the second new thing. It is also a small gift I intend to give you. He paused, a special piece of clothing. Chapter 262. After dinner, Nightingale took the box back to her bedroom, but before she could open it, Lightning, Maggie, Lily and Mystery Moon also jumped in, their eyes shining as they stared at the box in her hands. What's wrong? Vendy couldn't help but laugh. Do you want to see what it is? Except for Lily, the other 3 nodded. His Royal Highness is biased. Lightning muttered, It's fine if he doesn't let us drink the wine, but why didn't he even give us a gift? He said he would only give it to adult witches. Lily sighed. You can ask him when you're an adult. And I don't care what's inside. Why did he drag me here? Hey, Mystery Moon was surprised. I only called you once, I didn't pull you. Stop, that's not the point. Lightning shouted, Mystery Moon is an adult, Maggie is also an adult, but they don't. That's right, Coo. Maggie pushed aside the white hair covering her face and raised her chin in protest. I also don't have Coo. His Royal Highness has his own considerations. Nightingale also felt a little strange. Before Roland had never treated everyone differently. Why did he choose to give the gift this time? Let's see what's inside first. Opening the box, they saw a strange piece of clothing in front of them. It looked like a few cloth bands and a cloth bag, very soft to the touch. The material was obviously high-quality satin, but no matter how they looked at it, it didn't look like a piece of clothing, because it was really too small. There is a piece of paper at the bottom, Lightning shouted. Nightingale spread out the paper and found that it was written with the introduction of the gift and how to use it, and next to the method of use there was a picture. Vendy also opened her own box. This thing is called a bra. It can relieve the weight of the chest, promote blood circulation, stabilize the posture, and at the same time reduce the discomfort of friction. Nightingale's voice became lower and lower, and she felt her cheeks suddenly become hot. This thing was actually used to support her chest. She couldn't help but look at Vendy, only to discover that all the other witches were also looking at her, revealing expressions of sudden realization. Pfft, Lily couldn't help but laugh. Now you know why you don't have any gifts, right? TSK, let me correct my previous statement. Lightning probably won't get this gift after she becomes an adult. You speak as if there will be, Mystery Moon said, glaring at her. I don't care. The latter rolled his eyes. Is this like a corset? Only Lightning was completely unmoved. Her eyes were filled with curiosity and envy. Can you wear it for me to see? Of course not. Vendi showed a rare look of embarrassment. After driving all four of them out, she was slightly relieved. Why would His Highness suddenly give us this? Nightingale also felt a little embarrassed. It was okay if it was just a gift of underwear. Everyone usually wore and used clothes from the castle, so no one felt embarrassed. But this obviously had to be suitable for different people to wear. In other words, before Roland had carefully observed everyone's size. This thought made her blush, and she couldn't help but want to hide in the mist. By the way, if it was Anna, what would she do? I'll leave and come back soon, Nightingale said as she spread out the mist, passed through the wall, and walked to the door of Anna's bedroom. After hesitating for a moment, she finally chose to knock on the door and enter. The door was quickly opened. Anna was wearing a nightgown, and her expression was the same as usual. What's the matter? I want to ask. Nightingale entered the room and turned around to close the door. What do you think about the gift from His Highness? I've already put it on. It's very convenient. Anna's answer caught her off guard. You've already put it on? Yes, Anna nodded. Do you want to see it? No, no need. She hurriedly waved her hand and hesitated. I just want to ask, don't you think it's strange to give this? Why? Anna was puzzled. His Highness also said that he wants to promote this and sell it to more people as a product, so he needs us to help him try it on. And this is very good. She patted her chest. It's soft and light. Except that the hook on the back is not easy to take off, it's much better than wearing an extra layer of underwear. So that's how it is. Nightingale couldn't help but sigh in her heart. She didn't care about these trivial things at all, but focused on His Highness's goal. Perhaps this was what made her different, pure and direct. As a gift from Roland, Nightingale knew that she would try it anyway, so why was she still so shy? It was the same before. There was no need to hide at all. She could just tell him her thoughts openly. If it was Anna, she would definitely do the same, right? Thinking of this, Nightingale went back to her room, picked up the bra and studied it for a while. She hid in the fog, fastened it, put on her coat, and reappeared in front of Vendi. It's a little big. She tried to jump. But it's really a lot more comfortable to wear. At least I don't have to worry about the rough clothes and the pain in my chest. Also, it doesn't affect my movements at all, and I can save the chest belt. It's very convenient. You should try it. No, I don't need it. Vendi shook her head. How can that be? Nightingale chuckled and pulled her into the fog. I always feel that His Highness designed this dress because of you. Sylvie felt that she had seen more strange things today than she had seen in the past few years. Water flowed from a pipe with a flick of the switch, soap with a light fragrance, and white wine that burned her throat. But Evelyn still accompanied His Highness to drink all 3 cups. Of course, the most inconceivable thing was the gift of clothes after dinner. She knew that the nobles did have the practice of giving corsets, but other people would at least put on a corset dress. How could they directly give this? And even if it was given as a gift, it was usually given to someone very close, such as a lover. But listening to His Highness, it seemed that he not only wanted to give intimate clothes to witches, but also wanted to promote it and popularize it in the Western Territory. Sylvie couldn't help but shiver. Which noble would choose to personally do this business, or, he had an extraordinary interest in breasts and buttocks. After Nightingale pulled Vendi into the fog, she could only vaguely see 2 vague shadows floating around the bed. Obviously, under the instigation and encouragement of the former, Vendi had accepted the gift. What about the other witches? Didn't they understand the meaning of giving intimate clothes? Thinking of Ash's warning, Sylvie couldn't help but swallow her saliva. Chapter 263. A week later, Roland officially launched the steel bridge construction project. You mean, you want me to raise 2 pieces of land in the middle of the river to act as footholds for the bridge piers? Lotus looked at the rolling river and asked in surprise, are you going to build a real bridge, instead of using a pontoon to connect the 2 ends of the river? Yes, Roland spread out the roll of paper in his hand, taking into account the impact of the river. The 2 pieces of land need to have a certain volume, and in order to reduce the impact, they need to be processed into this shape. This is the shape of a ship. Lotus looked back at the drawing. Yes, to be exact, it should be spindle-shaped, he nodded. As long as it is parallel to the direction of the current, it will receive the smallest impact. The problem is, the Redwater River is nearly 10 meters deep. Can you make the bottom of the river rise? It's not difficult to do, Your Highness, Lotus simply replied, leave it to me. For the sake of insurance, the ship responsible for carrying the witches was Little Town. The wide concrete hull of the ship moved in the river as if it was walking on flat ground. The helmsman was still Lightning, and the sail power was provided by Vendi. However, in the last week, when the latter saw the prince, she would slightly avert her eyes, seeming somewhat uncomfortable. Until today, Roland finally saw her raise her head, looking straight at him as usual, and when they passed each other on the ship, he also heard her whisper, thank you. You have to give me credit for this, Nightingale whispered in his ear from the fog. Little Town quickly left the pier, heading towards the middle of the wide river. Carter had already pulled up the hemp rope on both sides of the river. The 2 red cloth strips tied to it were the expected positions of the bridge piers. After the cement ship moved to the first point, Lotus stood on the edge of the ship and began to display her ability. She saw that the river suddenly seemed to boil, surging upwards, forming a hill. Soon, gravel, grass, and mud emerged from the surging river, and the water gradually became turbid. So that's how it is, Roland thought, her ability can not only transform the solid ground, but also the water, and raising the water surface is much easier than the loose gravel. Although the rising river water immediately rolled down in all directions, the riverbed had already been lifted up bit by bit. Not long after, a ball of greenish-gray soil floated to the surface of the water. It looked very soft and emitted an unpleasant stench. Everyone could not help but cover their noses. However, in Roland's eyes, all of this was top-notch fertilizer. Over the centuries, the bones of fish and other aquatic creatures, the water plants, and the excrement of the residents were deposited in the soil bit by bit. If it wasn't for the inconvenience of transportation, he would have liked to use the soil to fertilize the fields. Unfortunately, they could only be shoveled away manually and thrown directly into the river. Just like that, he cleared a layer and leveled it up. Finally, he saw the yellowish-brown solid soil. What followed next was to repeat this process until the 2 pieces of land were completely shaped. Roland estimated that this process would last for at least a week. However, just lifting the land out of the water did not mean that it could be used immediately. The flowing river would constantly carry away the sediment. Without any protection, even the spindle-shaped land would not last for more than a decade. He called Car Van Bate to his side and took out a charcoal pen. While drawing, he explained the next step to solidify the ground. You mean, we should dig grooves at the edge of the land and then pour cement in? The current Minister of Construction asked while gesturing at the drawings. No wonder he's an outstanding member of the King's City Mason Guild, Roland thought with satisfaction. With just a few simple reminders, he immediately understood my intention. Yes, the length of each section should not exceed 5 meters and the depth should be controlled at about 1 meter. After filling it with cement, let the witches lower this section of the groove by 1 meter. Repeating this process, you can form a cement wall that goes straight to the bottom of the riverbed. This plan was thought up by Roland after seeing Lotus' ability. Since she could control the ground to fall directly, then presumably she could also bring the structures built on the ground into the ground. Your idea is really ingenious, Car's eyes lit up. In this way, even if the river washes away the soil on the outside, it will still be blocked by the tightly wrapped walls. Roland nodded. The key point is to control the overall height of the sinking. If it is too little, it will lead to the bottom not being able to be wrapped tightly, and if it is too much, it will waste the cement and delay the construction period. You will be responsible for controlling this. Yes, Your Highness, he replied, counting the silt and soft soil dug out. I estimate that the entire height should be about 12 meters. In addition, after surrounding the cement wall, the land in the middle should not be covered with cement. In the future, I will plant flowers and grass on it. The prince urged. Plant flowers? Car was stunned. After all, these walls could not be watertight, and if they were to be built in sections, the walls would inevitably have even gaps. If he wanted to further stabilize the soil, the simplest way was to plant grass. Vegetation could balance the soil water content and reduce soil erosion, especially after Leaf had magically modified the super long root weeds, which could ensure that the soil was firmly consolidated together. After briefly explaining the role of plants in preserving the soil, Roland turned to look at the busy workers on the riverbank. How is the construction of the bridge now? We are laying the cement gravel road, Carr reported without hesitation. It should be completed this week. According to the plan, the bridge on both sides of the river would be made of rubble and cement, just like the Western Territories city wall. As long as the positioning and measurement work were done, the construction itself would not be difficult. The bridge ramp was raised by a full 7 meters compared to the ground, and was connected to the city streets through a long gentle slope with an arc. With the height difference between the river embankment and the water surface, when the iron bridge was completed, it should be able to form a clear height of 10 to 12 meters from the Redwater River, which was basically enough for the sails of the river. At present, only one span of the main bridge had been completed, and it was currently being tested on the shore. Because the span was not large, the load was extremely low. Even if Roland knew nothing about bridge engineering, he was not worried about its reliability. In the era before the overloaded rear 8 wheels, the 30-centimeter high I-beam was a guarantee of stability. Even if it was crowded with people, it would still be impossible to break the steel beam. What's more, from the processing to the assembly and welding, Anna would take care of everything, so the probability of a shoddy construction was extremely low. Similarly, its installation was also very simple. After the 3 spans of the main bridge were prefabricated, Hummingbird would directly lighten it, and then hand it over to Lightning to hoist in place. When this steel bridge, which could allow 2 four-wheeled carriages to pass side by side, was erected on the Redwater River, the north and south banks would truly be connected as a whole. Even the greatest stonemason would find it difficult to imagine such a magnificent bridge. Looking at the sparkling wide lake, Carr sighed. Your Highness, does this steel bridge have a name? Chapter 264. Under the scorching sun, Sirius Daly, wearing a straw hat, walked along the riverbank, checking the growth of the wheat ears. After nearly 4 months of planting, the wheat was now basically mature. As far as the eye could see, the boundless wheat field was like a golden ocean. The ears of wheat were thick and plump, and not only did the number of caryopsis double, even the size of the wheat was bigger than any spring wheat he had seen before. Without waiting for the harvest to be weighed, Sirius knew that this year would be a bumper harvest. There was no doubt that this must be the work of the witches. He had accompanied his father in farming for 10 years, so he naturally knew what an ordinary wheat should look like. A wheat plant was divided into 1 to 3 years, and each year could produce 20 to 30 fruits. Whether the soil was fertile or not would indeed affect the size of the wheat, but directly doubling the number of caryopsis? Other than witches, he couldn't think of any other explanation. There were many other changes like this, such as the towering water tower in the town. He had observed those gigantic structures up close, and it was impossible to move a large iron bucket to an iron frame that was taller than a residential building with human strength alone, not to mention that they were built almost overnight. Nowadays, the townspeople living in the community rarely needed to carry a bucket to fetch water. As long as they turned on the faucet, the cool well water would pour out from the pipe. The same was true for the island, in the middle of the Redwater River. Since His Highness held the awards ceremony, when Miss Nana was placed on the ceremonial platform, the use of witches became increasingly undisguised. Making a piece of land appear out of thin air on the empty river, this was obviously something only witches could do. He had asked the city hall director Berev about this matter, but the answer he got was that he didn't need to care, as His Highness Roland had his own ideas. Well, in any case, the royal family always liked to go against the church. Even if the latter sent an army to crusade against His Highness, they had to first defeat the first army before they were qualified to speak, otherwise, the western region could only belong to Roland Wimbledon. Wasn't Duke Ryan the best example? Sir, you came. 2 serfs who were weeding in the field saw Sirius daily, and immediately came to greet him. You see, this wheat field is ready to be harvested, so, we want to ask if what Sir Lord said before is still valid. Yes. The serf rubbed his hands nervously. Can we really be promoted to free people? As the person in charge of the Ministry of Agriculture, in addition to recording the best planting methods and calculating the harvest, Sirius also had another important responsibility, to communicate with the serfs, and to promptly preach the policies of His Highness and City Hall to them. Although he didn't like these country bumpkins who had to deal with mud all day, the knight's self-discipline allowed him to carry out his mission. Do you see those slogans? Sirius pointed at the banner beside the farmland. Sir, I don't understand. The serf smiled awkwardly. Labor creates wealth, and labor changes fate, he said. That is to say, as long as you work hard, you will have the opportunity to be promoted to a freeman. This is the promise made by His Royal Highness, and it will be fulfilled. Is that so? That's great. In addition, after becoming a free citizen, you can move into the town's central area, have your own brick house, and obtain the right to receive primary education. In the future, you don't need to ask me what these slogans mean. Sirius repeated the corresponding propaganda content. Yes, my lord. The serf nodded excitedly. The weather is hot. Do you want to go sit in my shed and drink a cup of cold water? No, you can go back to your work. He waved his hand, looked at the 2 people bowing their heads to thank him for a long time, and then returned to the field to continue with his previous work. This was the question Sirius had heard the most in the past month. No matter how much he preached, they would always take the trouble to ask again, as if they were afraid that the Sir Lord would cancel the policy in the blink of an eye. Not far away, someone surrounded him. Hello, Sir Sirius. After the wheat is harvested and dried, do we really only need to hand over 70%? Sirius sighed in his heart. The number of times this question appeared was second only to the promotion of a freeman. The first year is indeed like this, but in the future it will only become less and less. If you become a freeman, you only need to hand over 20%, this is what we have repeatedly emphasized. It would be great if we could really be promoted. One of the tall men touched the back of his head and said, then the remaining 30% of the wheat, it can only be sold to His Royal Highness, eaten by ourselves, or kept as seeds. Sirius clapped his hands, simply having them call over the surrounding serfs. Listen carefully. Border town prohibits the private sale of food, whether it is sold to the local townspeople or to foreign merchants. It is a violation of border town's laws. If you do so, not only will your gains be confiscated, but you may also be imprisoned. What if the Lord only offers a very low price? The tall man muttered. Of course there won't be such a situation. His Royal Highness will purchase food at a stable market price, whether it is a bad harvest or a good harvest, there won't be any significant changes. So you don't have to worry about not being able to afford to eat after selling the wheat, nor do you have to worry about harvesting too much, resulting in not being able to sell it or selling it at a low price. Sirius emphasized, in the whole of Border Town, there is only one place where you can sell food, that is the convenience market, and the manager of the market is our city hall. In the end, the price is. Rest assured, His Royal Highness will personally announce the purchase to you. Looking at the serfs dispersing in 2s and 3s, Sirius licked his dry lips and continued to inspect the crops. He didn't know how many of these people would keep his words in mind, but Sir Berev had clearly conveyed His Royal Highness' unyielding will. When the time comes, those who smuggle food will be severely punished. At this moment, a young serf broke away from the crowd, turned around and came back. My lord, he said while gasping for breath, I still want to ask you a question. Do you know where Miss May and Lady Irene went? He hesitated. Recently there have been no theatrical performances in the square. I want to ask you about their current situation. Are they sick? This was a fresh and interesting question. Sirius couldn't help but raise the corner of his mouth. If he hadn't happened to see them in the city hall, he really wouldn't have been able to answer. They went to Longsong Stronghold. Ah, the other side showed a disappointed look. Don't tell me they don't intend to stay in Border Town. They only went to the Stronghold Theater to perform. He shrugged his shoulders. And now the weather is so hot, you can't bear to see them standing under the sun, sweating profusely, right? When autumn comes, they will continue to return to the square to perform new plays. So that's how it is. Thank you, my lord. Looking at the young man's contented back, Sirius couldn't help but think of his own experiences in the past few months, from being a knight to a captive, and then from a captive to a city hall official. He didn't want to return to the Wolf family's territory, where there was nothing but a dilapidated house and a stretch of wheat fields. Becoming a knight was just a way to get rid of his father's life of farming. Chapter 265. The first batch of wheat planted in Border Town finally ushered in the harvest day. Under the scorching sun, the serfs used sickles to cut the wheat stalks, bundled them up and transported them to the other side of the river. Roland knew that the process from ear to kernel was a very tedious one. Before mechanical farming tools and combine harvesters became popular, the wheat needed to be separated, cleaned, screened, and dried manually. Now, he once again witnessed this process. After the wheat stalks were transported back to the camp, the serfs spread them flat on the ground to dry, and then used a variety of tools, wooden sticks, stones, and rakes, to repeatedly beat the wheat stalks and ears, so that the carrions could be peeled off. This process often lasted for 3 or 4 days. In Roland's memory, in the countryside, oxen or donkeys were used to pull the stone mill to press the wheat stalks back and forth, which not only saved a lot of effort, but also made the peeling process more uniform. It had to be said that the level of agriculture in Border Town was really too backward. After beating, it was time to turn the situation around. If there was no fork, they would use a wooden stick instead, or they would directly grab the wheat stalks with both hands and throw them into the sky, just like stir-frying vegetables. After the early beating, most of the carrions had been broken, and this process separated the fruit from the wheat stalks. The threshed wheat stalks actually had many uses. After being crushed, they could be returned to the field, used as livestock bedding, or made into fodder and paper. But Roland had no time to develop the green industry at the moment, so he could only watch the serfs pile the wheat stalks by the river and burn them all. In the next few days, gray smoke fluttered over the town all day long, comparable to the previous cement powder pollution. At the same time, the 2 spindle-shaped islands of the Redwater Bridge had also been cleaned up, and the construction of the water-retaining wall was carried out as planned. The foundation piers were prefabricated in the same way as the main bridge. First, concrete columns containing shaped steel and steel bars were poured in the open space, and then, weight reduction hoisting was carried out. Finally, Lotus was responsible for sinking it into the soil, leaving only half of the steel plate exposed, waiting to be connected to the bridge. Therefore, during this week, Roland basically wandered between the Redwater Bridge and the threshing ground, and his skin was tanned a lot. After the wheat stalks were forked out, there was only a layer of wheat grains and husks left in the threshing ground. The serfs swept them together and piled them up into hills, then stood on the hills, scooped up the mixture with shovels, and threw it into the open space in front of them. Because the husks were much lighter than the fruits, they fell farther to the ground when the wind blew. Therefore, the grains were scattered under their feet, while the husks and debris were scattered far away. Using this method, they collected the grains step by step. Of course, it was impossible to completely clean the chaff, and in the process, the grains would be mixed with mud and gravel. Therefore, Roland made up his mind to prepare a batch of farm machinery for next year's harvest. He probably couldn't make a combine harvester, but a sheller was quite easy to make. He just needed to replace the stone mill with a millstone, install a screen under it, and use a blower to separate the broken chaff. When the plump wheat grains were evenly spread on the threshing floor, it seemed as if the entire northern bank of the Redwater River was dyed with a layer of gold. Looking at these golden fruits, Roland's heart was filled with a sense of accomplishment. Regardless of whether the harvested grain was enough to fill the stomachs of more than 10,000 people, at least for Border Town, this was a memorable day. From today onwards, the grain in his territory would gradually change from being completely dependent on imports to being self-sufficient. After drying for 3 days, the wheat entered the stage of bagging and weighing. "Your Highness, this time we had a great harvest." That afternoon, Barav excitedly ran into the office. According to the preliminary statistics of the City Hall, the yield per mu of each responsible field is at least 4 times higher than in the past, and the highest is currently 6 times higher. In this way, this year's harvest is enough to fill the stomachs of the subjects. Really? Roland couldn't help but laugh. It seems that the newly built granary in the castle district won't always be empty. Do you know what this means? The expression of the City Hall director seemed to be even more excited than Roland. Border Town only needs to add another 2,000 farmers to meet the food consumption of 50,000 to 60,000 people. This is incredible. Border Town can completely expand into the largest city in Greycastle, no. He paused for a moment. The most magnificent city on the continent. In this era, the main reason why the urban population could not increase was the low production capacity of grain. A large city like King's City, which had a population of more than 20,000, already required dozens of villages to provide food for it. Each village had a population of about 1,000 to 2,000. If half of them were engaged in farming, the total number of people would be 20,000. In other words, the grain produced by a farmer could not only feed himself and his family, but also one city resident at most. This was the so-called invisible constraint on productivity. It was hard for Barav to imagine that after mechanized farming was popularized, the output of just one person would be enough to feed tens of thousands of people. The main reason why Border Town could achieve such a great harvest without the promotion and development of agricultural technology was the golden ones modified by Leaf. Using as few farmers as possible to feed as many people as possible, liberating human resources from the farmland and putting them into industrial production, this was the strategy that Roland had decided on from the very beginning. Now that the Ministry of Agriculture had obtained the best planting process, and in the coming years, iron farming tools and machinery would be used in farming, the per capita output would definitely increase. In the evening, Roland held a bonfire speech by the Redwater River. Time seemed to have returned to that dusk 4 months ago. It was still the same bonfire, the dense crowd, and the last trace of the afterglow on everyone's faces. The only difference was the expression on everyone's face. Compared to the fear and uneasiness they had felt when they first arrived, their faces were now brimming with joy and unconcealable expectation for the harvest. Roland waved his hand downward, and the scene immediately quieted down. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the prince to fulfill his promise. "I know what you want to hear." Roland did not follow his usual practice of first putting his name and title. Instead, he said straightforwardly, "I can also tell you without a doubt that the promotion rules announced before are still valid and will continue." His words ignited the atmosphere. The crowd could not help but shout. Many people knelt down and praised the prince's benevolence. "Long live the Lord! Long live His Royal Highness!" After the grain has been handed in, the promotion list will also be announced. Roland waited until the cheers subsided a little, then continued, "City Hall will be responsible for the arrangements after you become free people. You can choose to continue farming or find another job in the town. In addition, from next year, as long as the harvest meets the promotion standards, even if the output is not among the top, you can still become free people. In other words, as long as you work hard, you can definitely get rid of the status of a serf. As I said, labor creates wealth, and labor changes fate." He paused for a moment and looked around. "I hope that one day in the future, there will be no more serfs in Border Town, and everyone can become my real subjects." Chapter 266. Timothy Wimbledon walked into the arched round room at the top of the Lord's Tower in the port of Clearwater. Unlike the common castles, this tower building was taller and narrower. In addition to dealing with government affairs and sightseeing, it was impossible to even summon ministers to hold court. The furnishings in the room had not been moved at all, as if the owner had just left and would soon return. Directly facing the entrance was a reddish-brown square table. The books on the table were arranged neatly, and there were a few unfinished manuscripts in the center. The quill was inserted into the ink bottle, and one could pick it up to continue writing. He walked step by step to the table and sat in the wide chair. The chair was covered with a cushion made of bamboo, very suitable for relieving the heat of the summer. There was also a large bucket of water next to the chair, obviously used to place the ice on, to cool down and dispel the heat. However, today's weather was a bit gloomy, and the dark clouds over the sea were very low, so the room did not feel stuffy. Timothy leaned over, put his face on the table, and gently sniffed. A faint fragrance entered his nostrils. This was the fragrance of Garcia's favorite blue sunflower, which was produced in Coldwind Ridge. Compared to rose and rosemary, it contained a unique coolness, as if the ice and snow of the northern region had been melted into it. Only by using an object for a long time could it be infected with one's own smell. There was no doubt that his sister was always like him, sitting in the chair with her hands on the table, listening to reports from her subordinates, or writing government decrees. Thinking of this, he could not help but laugh. Ha, 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 ha 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 ha. In the end, Timothy simply leaned on the back of the chair, looked up and laughed loudly. He finally won. Garcia gave up the port of Clearwater, gave up the Southern Territory, which was equivalent to giving up the throne of Greycastle. Since he found out that the Black Sail fleet was moving north along the coastline, he immediately summoned his subordinates, drove more than 5,000 slaves, rats, and criminals straight to the Southern Territory, and launched an attack on Garcia's nest, the port of Clearwater. The only resistance came from the Sand Nation in the extreme south. He did not know what kind of promise this group of people had received, but one by one they rushed forward as if they did not care about their lives. But the trouble was, they also had berserk pills. This battle lasted for nearly half a month, during which Timothy took advantage of his numerical advantage to disintegrate the opponent's counterattack time and time again, and constantly nibbled away at the Sand Nation's line of defense. Nearly 3,000 people died in the war of attrition. If not for the influence of the pills, this motley crew would not have dared to step onto the battlefield, let alone fight the savage and ferocious Sand Nation head-on. The result of the battle was that he had crossed over layers of corpses and climbed up to the Lord's Tower of the port of Clearwater. The Queen of Clearwater had become history, and the southern border of Greycastle had finally returned to his control. Your Majesty. The knight, who was guarding outside the door, probably heard Roland's carefree laughter. It doesn't matter. Timothy got up, tilted his head, and motioned for him to follow him. Then he went up to the balcony from the side door of the roundhouse. The slightly salty sea breeze blew against his face, and his robe fluttered in the wind. The dark clouds in the distance were getting thicker and thicker, as if a heavy rain was approaching. What a pity, he thought. He had originally planned to see his sister's port, dock, and Lord's Tower turn into ashes in the raging flames, but it seemed that he would not be able to do so. For the past 6 months, he had been leading troops on expeditions, and had almost never stayed in King City for a full month. All of the government affairs were entrusted to the Prime Minister. Although Marquis Wyke seemed to be very loyal, but loyalty did not mean that he would always be able to resist temptation. Gerald Wimbledon was the best example. He had to return to King City as soon as possible, and stabilize the political situation. But the rain in the south would last for several days, and he could not wait until then. I will leave for King City early tomorrow morning, Timothy said. In addition to my personal guards and King City Knight Regiment, the rest of the knight and mercenaries will be under your command. Sir Ed Hawes, guard the southern border for me, and don't let the Sand Nation take a single step into Greycastle. You want me to stay here? The young knight from the Hawes family in the north was startled, but I still want to continue fighting for you, Your Majesty. Aye. Guarding the border is also fighting for me, sir, Timothy interrupted, "Listen, there are still many things to do here, so I have to leave behind a loyal and capable person to deal with the aftermath." But Ed seemed a little hesitant. "I know what you are worried about." The new king smiled and patted him on the shoulder. "Rest assured, you won't always stay here. When the matter of the port of Clearwater is over, I will immediately transfer you back to King's City. Grey Castle is still not unified, and before recovering the Western Territory, I need more night to fight for me. How could I forget you here?" He raised his head, his eyes shining, and then he knelt down on one knee and shouted, "Yes, Your Majesty." "Get up." Timothy nodded with satisfaction. "There are 3 main things you have to do next. The first is to escort all the residents of the port of Clearwater to King's City." "Don't you want to hang these traitors?" the knight asked in surprise. "No, they are not the real traitors. If they were really on Garcia's side, they would have already left with the Black Sail fleet. If I kill these people, I will only be playing into her hands." However, the influence of his sister was really beyond his expectations. With more than 10,000 people in the port, plus the slaves captured from Eagle City, in the end there were only more than 400 people who were unwilling to leave. If it weren't for the Sand Nation's desperate resistance, this port would be no different from an empty city. "Your Majesty is merciful." The second thing is to burn the dock, shipyard, and the Lord's Tower. I want everyone in the Southern Territory to see that Garcia's lair no longer exists. Even if she comes back, she will only get ruins. "Yes," the knight replied. "The last thing is to collect refugees for me." Timothy looked at the sky and the sea, and calmly said, "Any homeless people, rats, bandits, or even Sand Nation will do." Since the Battle of Eagle City until today, the disputes in the Southern Territory have never subsided, so there should be a large number of refugees in the surrounding villages and towns. It doesn't matter how you collect them, but before the start of the war to suppress the Western Territory, you must at least provide me with a team of 5,000 people. Garcia's escape proved the correctness of his strategy, which was to use more than half of the population of Grey Castle to consume the strength of the rebels. Under normal circumstances, a team of about 100 knight would lead thousands of civilians to launch an attack. The knight would not participate in the battle, but was only responsible for distributing the pills and commanding the battle. In the face of an absolute advantage in numbers, as long as they continued to consume the population, the one who would not be able to hold on would be the enemy. Garcia's retreat was a decisive performance. If she had stubbornly defended the port of Clearwater, she would inevitably be swallowed up by the crazy civilians who had swallowed the pills. Chapter 267. Your Majesty, why hasn't there been any news from my brother? Ed's words made Timothy slightly surprised. Indeed, it had already been 2 months since Lehman Hawes had been sent to loot the Western Territory. Taking into account the journey back and forth, he should have already reported the situation or returned to King's City. Although one of the tasks given to Lehman was to seize control of the Western Territory as soon as possible, Timothy was clear that after taking the pills, the 1,500 people were almost useless. Relying on them to occupy the Western Territory was unlikely, so the main goal was still to seize the pills in the Stronghold Church, find out the details of the Duke's battle, and finally attack Border Town to consume a round of Roland's forces. This was a tried and true method to deal with Garcia. Even if they didn't capture the port of Clearwater, and the militia was completely annihilated, most of the knight's troops would be able to return safely. As long as they gathered a group of useless people, they would be able to continue the attack. But why has there been no news from Lehman Hawes and the knight's troops? Maybe he delayed his return because of the attack on Border Town, or maybe he's on his way back, Timothy slowly said. These reasons were obviously not very convincing, but he didn't want to say the most likely answer in front of Lehman's brother. Maybe when I return to King's City, I'll receive news from him. Your Majesty, when the time comes, can you please tell you his news? Timothy nodded. Of course, I'll send a messenger to deliver it. Thank you, Your Majesty. The new king leaned against the railing, looking at the occasional bright light in the dark clouds. The sound of thunder seemed to come from far away. It wasn't loud, but it was dull and vigorous, as if it directly pounded on his heart. Ed's question made the joy in his heart fade a lot. If Garcia Wimbledon's resistance was a matter of course, and Tilly Wimbledon's departure made him disappointed, then Roland Wimbledon's actions were completely unimaginable. He had thought that he did not need to spend any effort to pay attention to his incompetent younger brother. After a while, he would get tired of living in a poor town and come to the capital. However, the actual situation was completely beyond his imagination. He stayed behind in Border Town, survived the months of the demons, defeated the Duke of Ryan, seized Longsong's stronghold, and even completely lost contact with Lehman's 1,500 militia. How did he do it? Timothy didn't have a deep understanding of his younger brother. When he was a child, neither Garcia nor Gerald liked to play with him. When he was an adult, they would only see each other once at the palace banquets. However, rumors of his naughty and mischievous deeds still lingered, and even his father didn't like him very much. Could it be that he had been hiding his true nature from the very beginning? Timothy quickly rejected this idea. Even if she was as smart as fifth sister, she was only good at learning and quick thinking. Her childhood personality was no different from that of an ordinary girl. How could a person be born with the ability to hide and deceive? Something must have happened to him after he went to Border Town, which caused this change. Timothy shook his head and put these distracting thoughts to the back of his mind. What's wrong, Your Majesty? No, it's nothing, the new king took a deep breath. The storm is coming. No matter what he encountered, Border Town's population and location made it impossible for him to retreat. There was no port, no fleet, and behind him was a barbarian land that he couldn't set foot in. He could only defend that corner until he was exhausted by his own offensive. Do you insist on leaving tomorrow? The knight asked worriedly. If I stop in the face of a little rain, how can I face the real storm? Timothy turned and said. Sooner or later, Roland Wimbledon would kneel at his feet and beg for forgiveness. The crown of the King of Grey Castle would inevitably be firmly placed on his head. However, this was just the beginning. The church's movements and intentions were becoming more and more obvious. One day, Grey Castle would fight against the church, and that would be the real challenge. Go and do your work. The sooner you complete the task I gave you, the sooner you can return to King's City. Yes, Your Majesty. Ed took 2 steps, then turned back and asked, I almost forgot, Your Majesty, what should we do with those who swallowed the pills and didn't die on the battlefield? This is the 3rd time they've taken the pills. Let them be incinerated along with the port of Clearwater, he replied with a blank expression. The knight took the order and left. Timothy suddenly felt a chill on the tip of his nose. He raised his head and saw rain falling from the clouds. At first, it was sparse, but then it became denser, and soon it set off a series of ripples on the sea. Asterisk at the top of the Tower of Babel in the new holy city of Hermes. Damn it! Damn it! Tayfun slammed the table and said, that son of a bitch. Blasphemer! How dare she target the church? This was the first time that Maine had seen the old bishop lose his composure. The blue veins on his forehead bulged, his beard trembled with anger, and his face was so ferocious that it seemed as if he wanted to swallow the other person alive. It was hard to imagine that the old bishop, who usually complained about Heather, would quarrel with her for an entire afternoon, but when he saw the jewelry box sent by the Queen of Clearwater, the old bishop broke out in an astonishing rage. There were no pearls in the jewelry box, only an iron ring, which was the bishop's emblem personally awarded by the Pope, and the ring was worn on a blood-stained broken finger. Maine sighed and reached out to close the jewelry box. Of course she dares, because we haven't obtained the blessings of God. God only favors the winner. This sentence immediately calmed Tayfun down. He sat back in his chair without saying a word, gasping for breath, and finally forced out a sentence, what are you going to do next? This was indeed a situation that the church had never encountered in the last 100 years. No one would have thought that Garcia would travel thousands of miles from Grey Castle to the Kingdom of Endless Winter, and after capturing King's City, she would also send the Black Sail Fleet to approach Hermes. Although Wolfshart City was on the verge of being captured, Maine didn't hesitate to transfer all of the gods' punishment army back to the old holy city. This city without walls was the barrier of Hermes, and under no circumstances could it be lost. After the offensive stopped, the Black Sail fleet also didn't continue to advance, but instead returned to King's City along the river. Obviously, the other party's intention was very obvious. As long as the church sent a large army to attack Wolfshart, Garcia would attack the holy city from the river. The sudden intervention of this royal power made the nobles of the Kingdom of Endless Winter restless. Maine believed that as long as he could let these greedy people continue to keep their territory and property, they would not hesitate to support Garcia as the new Queen of Endless Winter. Today's predicament was not something he could easily solve. But the church wouldn't be subdued by this kind of difficulty. Long before he became the bishop, he had already understood that he would have to walk on a thorny road. First of all, the holy city needs a new bishop. You first make a list of candidates, and the final candidate will be decided by the Pope, Maine slowly said. What about the enemy? Tayfun snorted through his nostrils. Chapter 268. Passing through the dark corridor, Maine rode the cage into the huge hole deep underground and came to the front of the pivotal secret temple again. His Majesty O'Brien was already waiting at the door. He looked older than the last time. His eyes were sunken in, and the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes spread across his cheeks like a spider web. However, his smile was still gentle and full of concern. Maine couldn't help but feel tears welling up in his eyes. He knelt in front of him. Your Holiness, get up, child. The Pope's voice was calm and steady. I heard you're in trouble. Let's talk in the hall. Today was not the day of conversion, so there were no candles lit along the walls in the hall. There were only candlesticks placed in a few corners. The Pope returned to the main seat and took a deep breath. Tell me, what happened outside? Maine was well aware of the importance of His Holiness O'Brien's responsibilities. It was not that he did not know what was happening outside the holy city, but that he did not have the time to deal with these trivial matters. That was why he had set up 3 archbishops to jointly manage the church affairs. He should try his best to avoid disturbing Her Holiness with these things, but he was powerless to solve the current troublesome situation. Maine quickly recounted what had happened from beginning to end. Heather is dead. O'Brien was silent for a long time after listening to the story. Then he sighed. She was an observant, clever, and devout little girl. I watched her slowly grow up. My condolences, Your Holiness. The murderer will definitely be punished. The Pope nodded. So, the current situation is that Garcia and the Kingdom of Wolfshart are helping each other? The new poison didn't work. It played a miraculous role in the capture of Broken Tooth Castle. The defenders managed to hold out for a month before all of them died. The army of judges quickly broke into the city, and there were almost no living people in the residential area. However, when we attacked Wolfshart City, the poison didn't seem to have the same effect. Now, the enemy's resistance is still tenacious. Maine reported. You made 2 mistakes, O'Brien said slowly. The illness caused by the poison will cause death within 7 to 10 days. You should have taken advantage of the first peak of the illness to launch an attack, and then quickly treated the residents in the city. This would have greatly reduced their hostility. Don't forget that we need as many people as possible, not empty cities. The second point is to wait a month before taking action. Although it can minimize the casualties, it will also give the enemy enough time to react and find a way to cure the disease. The essence of the new poison is demonized demonic beasts. According to the Holy Book of Magic, there are more than 70 kinds of abilities that can restrain its infection, and more than 30 kinds of abilities that can directly kill it. It's not surprising that such a witch would appear in a city with tens of thousands of people. You mean, they colluded with witches? At the moment of life and death, who cares if they are the devil's minions or not, the Pope said calmly, regardless of whether this witch took the initiative to stand out, or was exposed and forced to treat the disease, it is not good news for the Church. If they can really stop our attack, the reputation of the witches in the kingdom of Wolfheart will change dramatically. They might even be regarded as heroes. It's all my fault, Maine said, bowing his head in pain. It is indeed a mistake, but it is not serious. You formulated such a strategy in order to reduce the losses of the army of judges and the gods' punishment army. Oh, Brian tapped Roland's shoulder with his scepter. Moreover, the 3 princesses of Greycastle and the king of Wolfheart are gathered together. This is also an opportunity for us. Opportunity, meeting? The bishop was startled. Yes, an opportunity to catch them all in one fell swoop. Oh, Brian stood up. Come with me. Under the guidance of the guards, Maine followed the Pope out of the pivotal secret area and slowly walked into the depths of the cave. The huge god's stone of retaliation emitted a dim light, illuminating the path under their feet. Gradually, the light became dimmer and dimmer. Maine could not help but look back, only to see that the pivotal secret temple and the god's stone had already been left far behind. At this time, the guards also lit torches to avoid tripping on the gravel on the ground. Where are we going? We have arrived, child. His Holiness. Oh, Brian stopped, breathing a little quickly. Phew. I'm getting old. It's so tiring to walk such a short distance. A guard came forward to support him. Your Holiness, let me carry you. It's okay. I just need to rest. He stood still for a while and then ordered, light the brazier. At this time, the bishop noticed that there were several towering iron shelves erected on the side of the stone path. If it weren't for the guards holding torches approaching them, it would have been difficult for most people to discover these metal objects hidden in the darkness. The guard climbed up the ladder and lit the turpentine basin at the top. Several dazzling flames suddenly spurted out. Maine first squinted his eyes, and after adapting to the change in light, he looked forward. In the flickering light of the fire, a dusty canvas appeared in front of everyone. It bulged high, and it was obvious that a huge object was covered under it. I originally planned to use it in the last 2 years to resist the increasingly ferocious demonic beasts, but now it seems that it will have to be activated in advance. Oh, Brian waved his hand. Take off the cloth. This is... As the canvas fell, Maine could not believe his eyes for a moment. It was a huge, ferocious-looking 4-wheeled iron carriage. Just one of its wheels was taller than him. It did not have a carriage, only a terrifying metal ram and a beast bone frame. In the middle of the frame was a bone shield that was full of barbs. It was as big as 3 or 4 doors. 2 perfectly straight iron poles, one on the left and one on the right, stretched out from the openings on the shield. They pointed straight forward, like sharp arrows that were ready to be shot. On both sides of the iron carriage, there were dozens of such iron poles. Each pole was as thick as his thigh, reflecting a dull metallic luster under the brazier. In the Holy Bible, it is named the siege beast. The Pope walked to the side of the iron carriage and patted the solid iron pole. It can only be activated by magic, and it requires 3 or 4 witches to operate properly. The attack range of the siege beast is far greater than that of a catapult or a ballista. It would be very difficult for an ordinary city wall to withstand the destruction of iron arrows. A sailboat made of giant wood would be like thin paper in front of it. Whether it is destroying the strong walls of Wolfheart City or blocking the advance of the Black Sail Fleet, it would be a piece of cake for it. This is also a weapon developed by the pivotal secret temple? No. Oh, Brian shook his head. You should be able to guess that it comes from our enemies, the devils of the abyss of hell. This is also the reason why the church hid the siege beast in the depths of the cave. Remember, when you use it, you must do your best to hide your whereabouts and not let the civilians see what it looks like. I understand. Maine bowed his head. Why can the devil's weapons be controlled by witches? Could it be that they also have the same magic as humans? He suppressed the doubts in his heart and did not continue to ask. It was obvious that he would only be qualified to understand these things after he became the new pope. In addition, in order to prevent Garcia and the Wolf King from escaping again, I will send 2 pure witches to assist you in battle." The Pope said in a solemn voice, "No one can escape from their hands. Go, use the blood of these blasphemers to send Heather off." His Holiness the Pope's pure witches. His heart trembled. The witches raised by the Church and survived were all called pure witches, but the witches under the Pope's command were the strongest ones selected from thousands of people. Their abilities were not even recorded in the Holy Bible of Magic. Compared to Heather, Tayfun and the few witches under his command, there was a world of difference. Now that His Holiness had personally said that they couldn't escape, the fate of the 2 had already been decided. Chapter 269. Roland held Border Town's first high-level plenary meeting in the castle's reception hall. Compared to the beginning when Barav and his dozen or so apprentices were the only ones to hold the fort, the city hall had now grown to a huge group of nearly 100 people. Among them were fallen nobles, the captured knight and his squires, as well as the natives who had completed their primary education and obtained their diplomas. Thanks to the growth of the population, the various departments had also taken shape one after another, so that the city hall finally had a little bit of the prince's expectation. He no longer had to do everything himself like before, now he only had to explain some simple policies and programs, and the embryonic city hall could break down the tasks to the various departments to complete, which made Roland feel very gratified. The participants of the first high-level meeting were all the highest heads of the departments, namely the Minister of Agriculture Sirius Daly, the Minister of Education Scroll, the head of the Ministry of Chemical Industry Kyle Seachy, temporary, the head of the Ministry of Construction Carr Van Bate, the head of the Army Iron Axe, and the head of the City Hall Barav Mons. The Ministry of Industry was still personally managed by Roland. After all, except for him, no one knew what industrialization looked like in the end. Beside each person was placed a bucket of ice water, emitting bursts of cool air. The ice placed in the bucket was enchanted by candle, so that it could be soaked in water for at least a whole morning. Even if it was scorching hot outside, the castle hall still maintained a cool temperature. Then each department separately report the recent situation. Roland took out the kettle from the bucket and poured himself a glass of ice water. "Let's start with the Ministry of Agriculture." "Yes, Your Highness." Sirius got up and saluted, then spread out the prepared paper roll. "This time the grain handed in is about 17,000 kilograms. This amount is enough to meet all the townspeople's food needs in the coming summer. In addition, according to your request, the Ministry of Agriculture will purchase the remaining grain at the market price, but this amount is far less than the proportion handed in, currently only 4,500 kilograms. The so-called dendrobium was a commonly used measuring container for wheat. It was a basket made of bamboo, so he only heard the number. He had no idea how to convert it into kilograms or liters. Fortunately, that was not important. The key was that he knew that the food he collected was enough to feed the townspeople. The key point was the second point. If he calculated it according to the method of collecting 70% of the grain and keeping 30% for himself, the amount of grain purchased should be about 7,000 kilograms. The portion that was reserved for grain and seeds for the next year would not be needed at all. In other words, some serfs did not sell the remaining 30% of the grain to the city hall, but chose to privately hoard it in wooden sheds. Although he had foreseen such a situation, he still sighed softly when it actually happened. The purpose of hoarding grain was obvious. They planned to speculate and resell it. If there was a food shortage in the town, or if there was a natural disaster, their grain could be sold at a much higher price than the market price. It was not impossible for the grain to be sold at more than 10 times the market price. This was also the reason why Roland had set the grain trade as the exclusive business of the city hall, and the purchasers had to show their ID cards. The grain problem was related to the most basic stability of Border Town. In the early days, when there was still not a surplus of grain, if they were allowed to sell it, it would be easy for people to buy it and then hoard it, which would eventually lead to a rise in the price of grain. By using the real name system to purchase grain, and at the same time prohibiting other sales channels, the grain price could be maintained at a stable level. Your Highness, why don't you force the purchase of the wheat in the hands of the serfs? Sirius asked doubtfully. In any case, the law doesn't allow them to sell it to others. Because it is their private property, how to deal with it is their freedom, Roland replied. I didn't stipulate that the serfs are not allowed to keep their own grain. You can also understand it as long as there is no explicit prohibition, it is allowed. Sirius looked a little confused, as if he didn't know how to understand this sentence. It wasn't only him, most of the people frowned, only Berev showed a thoughtful expression. Is there anything else you want to report? Roland drank a mouthful of ice water. This concept of emphasizing rules and procedures could only wait for them to slowly comprehend it in the future. In other words, once they understood it, they could be regarded as a qualified official of the new era. Of course, this method could easily lead to the other extreme and lead to the creation of bureaucracy. However, bureaucracy was still better than chaos and disorder or unbridled behavior. Yes, Sirius Daly shook his head. Now that the fields have been harvested, I don't know how to arrange the next year's fallow plan. No, these lands will not be fallowed, next year they will continue to plant wheat, Roland waved his hand. The piles of manure at the edge of the fields are prepared to fertilize the land. Next, you will instruct the serfs to shovel it into the fields, mix it with the soil, and then continue to pile new manure in the empty space. In the hot and humid summer, it would only take 2 months for the manure to rot, while in the winter it would take about 4 months. By the next spring, not only would the quality of the soil have been improved by the first batch of compost, he would also have a new batch of compost that could be used as base fertilizer, so there would be no need to fallow the fields. Not to mention the advanced fertilizer, just the use of human and animal manure in agricultural production would already be a great improvement. Well, if this is your request. He touched his head, in addition. Your Highness, I'm afraid that 1 or 2 stone mills won't be enough to grind so much wheat. I want to apply for the construction of a mill next to the Redwater River, preferably powered by a steam engine. Yes, Roland nodded, this was a new breakthrough. In addition to himself, there was finally someone else who was trying to use this new power. You first put forward your plan to Berev, and after obtaining the funds, you can work out a detailed plan with the Ministry of Construction. Yes, Your Highness, Sirius responded, the last matter is the promotion of the freedmen. This time a total of 516 people were qualified for promotion, because it was strictly based on the amount of wheat submitted on the spot, so no one raised any objections. I have already submitted the list to Sir Berev. Then he once again stood up and saluted, my report is finished. Well done, Roland clapped his hands twice to show his encouragement. This former young knight of the Wolf family now seemed to have adapted to life in Border Town. Moreover, he was also doing a good job in the city hall. With a little packaging he would become an excellent publicity example, and in the future when it came to recruiting the fallen nobles of Longsong Stronghold and the Knight, he would be able to play a big role. The second to give the report was Scroll. Her long hair was coiled behind her head, she was wearing a clean and tidy white shirt, matched with a pure black skirt without any decoration or lace. She looked mature and capable. It was hard to imagine that half a year ago, she was still an exiled witch who had to hide from the church. At present, there are 2 batches of people who have completed their primary education, a total of 85 people, most of whom have studied at the academy opened by Mr. Carr. Her ability was a photographic memory, so when she reported the data she didn't need to do any preparation. This made Roland very envious. Among them, 46 people have chosen to work in the city hall, 21 people have decided to work in the bicycle factory, 13 people have applied to join the First Army, here she paused, and 5 people have applied to work in the chemical laboratory. 5 people? Roland couldn't help but look at Kyle Sichi. The latter's complexion obviously didn't look good. It seemed that the publicity effect of the award ceremony was far from what he had expected. In this way, the 3 new laboratories might have to be idle for some time. Chapter 270. When it was the Ministry of Chemical Industries' turn, Kyle snorted, Your Royal Highness, I hope you can find the person in charge as soon as possible. I don't want to attend this kind of meeting again. Roland secretly rolled his eyes. After becoming a leader, he found that he had to selectively ignore some words. How could it be so easy to find a talent who dabbled in alchemy and chemistry? Do you have any clue about the large-scale production of the two acids? No, Kyle shrugged. That's why I need to spend more energy and more manpower on this project, instead of sitting here and wasting time. After staying in Border Town for a long time, his words also contain some Roland's vocabulary. If I have to report, I can only say that the laboratory is short of people, the more the better. In addition, although the 5 people who joined recently are young, they are quite clever. It seems that the primary education you created is still useful. Well, the chief alchemist was probably the most disrespectful to him, but considering his age and his enthusiasm for chemical experiments, Roland didn't have any resentment. After all, after the explosion accident and being completely cured by Nana, his first reaction was unexpectedly to be able to unscrupulously carry out experiments, and even to taste the taste of different acids. This kind of enthusiasm was really unparalleled. Well, you continue your research. I'll ask Barav to find a way to fill the personnel gap. By the way, Your Royal Highness, Kyle opened his mouth again, have you finished writing your intermediate chemistry? If you can give it to me for reference, maybe I can come up with a large-scale acid production method earlier. I said at the awards ceremony that as long as you can train enough apprentices and assistants to fill the new laboratory, I will give you the book. Roland spread out his hands. In fact, he hadn't written a single word of the book yet, just the elementary chemistry alone had already exhausted his limited knowledge of chemistry. Even if he racked his brains for the intermediate chemistry, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to write more than a few pages of content. The 4th was the Minister of Construction, Car Van Bate. First of all, I want to thank Lady Scroll. He first nodded to Scroll and said, I'm really happy to know that those children can graduate smoothly. Compared to the chief alchemist, Mr. Stonemason's social skills were worlds apart. Scroll nodded in return and said, it's my duty. Then, Carr opened the notebook he carried with him and said in an orderly manner, nowadays, the town's various projects are progressing steadily. The main projects are the Kingdom Avenue, the Redwater Bridge, the new residential area and the new city wall. Among them, the number of people working on the construction of the Kingdom Avenue had reached 4,500, half of which came from Longsong Stronghold, and it was expected to be completed next spring. The Shishui Bridge is still under the construction of the underground mud wall, and the residential area has been expanded to the vicinity of the old city wall. The number of construction workers is about 1,000. As long as we can guarantee the supply of bricks and cement, we should be able to complete the task of moving all the Eastern region refugees into the town before the arrival of the months of the demons. Since Carr often reported to Roland about the progress of the project, he did not mention anything about the expansion of the castle district or the construction of the witch house. In addition, after the location of the new city wall was set and the wire was pulled, the construction was completely done by Lotus, and the daily progress was maintained at around 100 meters. You've worked hard, Roland nodded. The Ministry of Engineering was the largest department in terms of personnel and funding, so the results were also the most. While speeding up the construction, don't forget to publicize Border Town's preferential treatment policy. After a year of practice, these handymen from Longsong Stronghold can also be regarded as qualified craftsmen, so you have to keep them in Border Town as much as possible. Yes, Your Highness, Carr replied. Then the next one. Iron Axe. This was the first time Iron Axe had participated in such a meeting, so he was obviously not used to it. He cleared his throat and said, Your Highness, there are 2 main things about the army. First of all, the Second Army has completed its basic training and can be sent to Longsong Stronghold at any time. Second, with the addition of new blood, the First Army now has 825 people. Apart from the 350 people in the artillery team, the rest of the soldiers have all been equipped with revolving rifles. That's all I have to say. After reporting, he gave a military salute. Good, let the Second Army set off tomorrow. Remember to place reliable people in the team. While in Longsong Stronghold, daily training and ideological training must not be interrupted, and every week report to Border Town, Roland instructed. The last one to speak was Berev. He first looked around at the crowd, then calmly saluted Roland and said, "Your Highness, since the last time we paid the Marjorie Chamber of Commerce's transportation fee and the cost of Theo's mission, the City Hall's treasury stock has been severely reduced. Coupled with the harvest this time, the Ministry of Agriculture is still purchasing food at the normal market price, resulting in the stock of Golden Dragon only a little more than 2,000. This can be considered a relatively dangerous limit. 2,000 Golden Dragon, compared to last winter, it was undoubtedly a huge amount of money, but Roland also knew that the current situation of Border Town was not the same as it was in the past. Just the monthly payment of more than 5,000 workers in the Ministry of Works was already a huge expense. There was also the current high salary of the First Army, the factory, the chemical laboratory, and the City Hall, all of which required a large amount of Golden Dragon. In other words, Border Town was now making money fast, but also spending money fast, and this was based on the fact that most of the materials and machinery were self-sufficient. I know. But at the beginning of next month, when the Marjorie caravan arrives in Border Town, we will be able to earn another income by selling the steam engine, Roland responded. Moreover, the purchase of food and the transportation of fugitives are not part of the daily expenses, so in the next 6 months, the treasury stock should be able to steadily increase. You don't need to worry too much. He paused. In addition, I intend to raise everyone's salary. Raise the salary? Berev was startled. Yes, today the City Hall is no longer an institution that only relies on a dozen people to run. Your workload has greatly increased, so naturally your salary will also increase. The prince laughed. Starting from this month, your salary will be raised to 5 Golden Dragons per month, the department head will receive 2 Golden Dragons per month, and then according to this ratio, the apprentices and assistants will also be uniformly raised. Rest assured, this amount of money is not much, only about 20 or 30 Golden Dragons. Although 5 Golden Dragons for the position of the City Hall director was not a generous amount, but Roland knew that what Berev loved more was power. At present, Border Town's financial income and expenditure were all calculated and distributed by him, and without any supervision department, he could casually obtain 100 times the income. And so far, he had not shown any signs of embezzlement. Of course, in addition to relying on the other party's self-awareness, Roland could also use Nightingale's ability to maintain the integrity of the department. Under her questioning, no one could conceal their misdeeds. In addition, there is one thing that you may already know, he continued, I intend to officially build a city here after the end of the months of the demons. In other words, Border Town will be upgraded to a real city. This big city will reach the barbarian land in the west, Longsong's stronghold in the east, and the hills and seas in the south. Its city walls will be natural mountains and natural strongholds, and its area will be far larger than King's City, or even any city in the 4 kingdoms. Chapter 271. At the end of the meeting, Roland left Berev alone. As you can see, the chemical laboratory and Greycastle Industries need people. Next, I plan to produce soap and perfume on a large scale, which also requires a lot of manpower. The prince said bluntly, when most of the townspeople pass the primary education examination, it will be at least next year, and there will only be 600 or 700 people, which is not enough. I need more people. If you conscript people from the stronghold. No, Roland interrupted, after the city is built next year, the stronghold and the town will be connected as a whole, which is equivalent to taking money out of the left pocket and putting it into the right pocket. I need more people outside the western region. This. Berev was a little embarrassed. I'm afraid it's not so easy to solve. If you go to other cities to fish people out, the local lord will not sit idly by. Don't go to the city. Roland dipped his finger into the cup, dipped it in ice water, and gestured on the table. I don't know if you have noticed, but since the end of the months of demons, Greycastle has been in a state of war. Including Timothy's several attacks on the southern territory, which led to the burning of Eagle City, and serious damage to the surrounding villages and towns. Then there was the expedition to the northern territory, depriving Duques of his title and territory for treason. Lastly, there was the attack on the sea in the east. He knocked the table twice, leaving a pool of water stain. It affected Siwanshire, Valencia, and Cold Raven Castle quite a bit. Not to mention those small towns in the surrounding area. Just from the number of people who fled to the capital, you can see how heavy the losses were. You mean? Barav showed a thoughtful expression. Spread the news of the western region. The prince smoothed out the water. In the past 6 months, only the western region has been peaceful, there has been no forced conscription, nor has it been attacked by the flames of war. Especially the first point, since Timothy has wantonly used civilians to fight, he will definitely recruit and even abduct civilians from all over the country. No one can guarantee that this kind of thing won't happen to them next time, so a safe place isolated from the flames of war is the main point of our propaganda. I think I understand, he pondered. You intend to attract civilians from other towns and villages by promising not to be conscripted, not to be forced into labor, and at the same time, to provide shelter, food, and a stable job? Almost. Roland nodded with a smile. Being flexible and receptive had always been an assistant minister's strong points. Also, we should focus on promoting the generous treatment that literate people can enjoy. I think there must be some desperate knight and nobles in these places who are willing to come to the western region to try their luck. Whether it was a village or a town, it was almost always the territory of a small noble. If it was a time of peace, no matter how barren the land was, no matter how poorly managed it was, a few acres of farmland would always be enough to fill their stomachs. However, if there was a serious loss of population during times of turmoil, it would be hard for them to continue living. At this time, if there was a safe place to go, most people would be tempted. In any case, even if the territory was left unguarded, it would not be occupied by others. After this period of time, they would bring money and mercenaries back to take over the territory. As for how to promote it, he believed that the other side had their own ways. But Your Highness, in this way, it will be another expense to arrange for these people, and the purchase of food cannot be interrupted, Barav said hesitantly. In case something happens to the caravan, the city hall treasury will soon run dry. Well, what you said makes sense, Roland touched his chin. The most important task of the new political power was to establish prestige and confidence in the hearts of the people. If they suddenly fell into a predicament where they could not pay their salaries, the good situation would take a sharp turn for the worse. Well, you go back and make a plan first. Wait until the caravan and border town have completed the next month's transaction, and after the treasury is full, then you can implement it. Yes, Your Highness, Barav said while putting his hand on his chest. After finishing his task, Roland returned to his office and began to think about how to complete Marjorie's balloon order. The unit price of 1,000 golden dragon balloons was even higher than that of a steam engine, but its cost was much lower. The airbag was mainly drawn by Soroya, while the hemp rope and bamboo basket were cheap goods. In fact, Roland had already trial-produced a simple sample in the arsenal's courtyard, a hydrogen balloon that could carry both Lightning and Maggie into the sky at the same time. After repeated consideration, he finally abandoned the hot air balloon plan. Gas needed to be obtained by dry distillation of coal, the equipment would take up a large area, and the manufacturing process would be very troublesome. In addition, coal had to be imported from other towns, so small-scale production was not cost-effective. It was far less convenient and easy to obtain than hydrogen. The trial product was made with a single-sided water coating, and after the painting was finished, the paper on the back was also burned, so the entire balloon was almost weightless, and its flexibility was also very outstanding. In the experiment, the inflated balloon was not afraid of rain, impact, or fire. Even when Maggie transformed into a variety of birds and fiercely pecked at it, there was not a single trace left behind. Only an iron needle could barely pierce through this 1 mm thick coating. Due to its extremely light weight, a hydrogen balloon with a diameter of about 2 meters could carry an adult person into the sky. The only difficulty was how to solve the problem of inflating the high-pressure hydrogen cylinder. The DC motor used for electrolysis of water to produce hydrogen could not be sold. A motor connected to a steam engine could inflate all the hydrogen balloons, which was obviously not cost-effective. If he wanted to continuously earn golden dragon from rich people, he must have a high-pressure cylinder that could be repeatedly inflated. The cylinder itself was not difficult. If the material was not good enough, the wall thickness could be supplemented, pig iron or wrought iron could be used. In any case, with Anna, precision processing was not a problem. The key was the inflation. In the previous generation, the pressure of the gas storage cylinder was more than 20 MPa. Wanting to rely on a pump to inflate it was undoubtedly a fantasy. Even 10 Chilean arms would be useless, at least a high-pressure air pump was needed. And if the pressure inside the cylinder was not enough, it was simply impossible to fill the hydrogen balloon. The high-pressure air pump was divided into piston air and turbine air pump. The former belonged to the technology tree of internal combustion engines, while the latter belonged to the category of turbines. No matter which one was developed, it was a large and time-consuming project. Until the evening, Roland finally came up with the simplest solution, self-inflating the cylinder. What gave him this inspiration was a piece of news that he had seen before he traveled to this world. A street vendor selling hydrogen balloons used a modified liquefied gas tank to store hydrogen, which resulted in an explosion, causing a tragedy. The reason was that the vendor directly reacted with dilute sulfuric acid and aluminum to produce hydrogen without calculating the amount of reaction. As a result, the pressure inside the tank was too high, and the tank directly burst. The method of self-inflating was to pour dilute sulfuric acid and active metal into the bottle to replace the hydrogen. Zinc was commonly used in the laboratory, and aluminum was the most common element that could produce hydrogen by weight. However, neither of these two elements were available in this era, so Roland still planned to use iron to react. Lucia could separate iron with extremely high purity, and the slow reaction speed at room temperature could be improved by heating and increasing the contact area, such as iron sheets and iron powder. An inner coating would be able to resist the corrosion of acid on the bottle. Thinking of this, he immediately drew a simple sketch on the paper. In order to reduce air leakage, the high-pressure cylinder should be as one piece as possible, so the body of the cylinder should be integrated, leaving only a raised threaded hole at the top, which could be screwed into the valve nozzle. After injecting the reactant from the hole and tightening the valve, the continuously produced gas had nowhere to go, and the pressure inside the bottle could reach a very impressive value. When in use, as long as the valve was opened, the hydrogen would rush out and rush into the air sac. Reflushing was also very convenient. After removing the valve, drying the water, and cleaning out the ferrous sulfate crystals, the reactant could be poured in again. Considering that dilute sulfuric acid was also an alchemy product, the inflating price obviously could not be set too low. Chapter 272. When Kyle Sichi returned home after finishing today's experiment, his wife had already made pancakes and mushroom soup. She also poured him a glass of white wine. The latter two items were sold in the convenience market, especially the white and huge mushrooms. As the introduction on the sign said, "You can't find anything more delicious than this." After tasting it, he found that it was true. After eating one piece, it was hard to forget the full and unique taste. Of course, it was also very expensive. A palm-sized flower cost 1 silver royal. If it were not for the high salary, Kyle would not have bought such expensive food. There were many things like this, such as soap and mirrors. As long as one had money, life in the town was much more comfortable than that of the common nobles. Roland was simply unfathomable. This was also what he felt the most. After dinner, his wife handed him a letter. "This is. The guard sent it this afternoon." "You hadn't come back yet," his wife said while cleaning up the tableware. According to him, it seems to be from Redwater City. "Really?" Kyle walked into the study, cut open the envelope with a knife, and took out the letter and opened it. The first sentence was, "Hello, dear mentor." This was a letter from Chavez. He could not help but smile. He sat at the desk and carefully read it. It turned out that after he left the Redwater City alchemy workshop, another alchemist, Capora, became the new chief alchemist. However, this man was narrow-minded. After obtaining the crystal glass formula left by Kyle, he not only claimed to the Lord that it was the work of him and Kyle, but also intentionally or unintentionally excluded Chavez in the alchemy experiment. In the letter, he complained that perhaps it was because he borrowed Capper's apprentice when exploring the double stone acid-making method, but in the end, he did not inform Capora of the results in advance. Now, several other alchemists seemed to have begun to avoid him, intentionally or unintentionally, which made Chavez very annoyed. Kyle could roughly understand their thoughts. As the youngest alchemist in the refining room, many people thought that Chavez stood out among the many apprentices only by luck and his appreciation. However, the chief alchemist sneered at this view. Saltpeter and green vitriol were both common materials. The reason why it was Chavez who discovered the double stone acid-making method and not others was enough to explain the problem. Observation, memory, bold conjectures, and careful experiments were all indispensable. This young man's talent was even above his own. In the end, Chavez also attached 2 alchemy formulas to the letter, saying that he had recently discovered 2 acids and wanted to share it with his mentor. Kyle could tell at a glance that the essence of these 2 formulas was nothing more than the neutralization reaction of acid and base to produce salt. He could write more than a dozen such formulas in one breath. Kyle Sichi sighed and put down the letter. His eyes moved to the Elementary Chemistry book that had been flipped through several times on the table. The thing that changed everything was the ancient book that Her Highness had given him. If it wasn't for it, perhaps he would still be like Chavez, still searching for the surface soil in the chaos and confusion, and treating it as a treasure. He took the book and flipped to the last page. It was a table that was neatly divided into more than 100 squares. Every time he saw this form, he couldn't help but get goosebumps. He felt an indescribable reverence and fear. The upper left corner of the grid was marked with a small serial number. Until the end, there was a total of 118. In addition to the first 2 rows, most of the grid was blank, but there were some in the middle that were filled with symbols. For example, number 26, iron, number 29, copper. The table's name was Periodic Table of Elements. The chief alchemist had shakily held the book and asked Roland about the contents of the blank spaces. The answer he got was that it was originally filled, but he couldn't remember. If the other side wasn't His Royal Highness, what he wanted to do the most was to slap the whole book on his face. According to the book, this table included all the elements in the world. If alchemy existed in the Holy Bible, there was no doubt that it would be the most dazzling chapter in the Holy Bible. But what made him afraid was, in the end, what kind of person would be able to draw such a chart? If they had already reached this point, then what about alchemy? It was nothing more than a crooked castle built by a group of children in the mud. Kyle suddenly remembered His Royal Highness' promise, if he could also call Chavez over, and also pull a group of apprentices that he didn't have enough time to take with him last time, maybe there would be hope to fill up the 3 new laboratories. In this way, the yearning, intermediate chemistry, would also be in his hands. Thinking of this, he immediately took out a piece of white paper and began to write a reply. In fact, during the meeting, His Royal Highness had asked him whether he had a clue about large-scale acid production, but he didn't tell him the truth, because the content was complicated and lengthy, and it would be a waste of time to talk about it. Most importantly, he didn't know whether this plan would work or not. After all, the method he had conceived was completely based on the elements and reaction principles in the book. Compared with the previous alchemy experiments, this hypothesis was even a bit like a child's ravings in his dreams. Using materials that had never been seen before and reactions that had never been heard of, to produce something that seemed to have nothing to do with the raw materials, just because they had the same element. However, Kyle Sichi had a faint premonition that this method might work. After all, the previous hundreds of replacement experiments all proved the correctness of the content in the book. With a preliminary plan, the next step was to complete a full set of theoretical experiments in the laboratory, because His Royal Highness had said that the process of large-scale production of products could also be reproduced in the laboratory. He quickly finished writing the letter. He didn't try to persuade Charles too much, but directly told this former disciple about the knowability, measurability, and attainability of alchemy. Kyle believed that any wise man who was interested in alchemy would not let go of such an opportunity to see the truth. He folded the letter, put it into an envelope, and sealed it with wax. Then he just had to wait until tomorrow to give it to a merchant who was willing to deliver the letter. After finishing all this, his line of sight once again moved to the periodic table of elements. If the blank space on the table could never be filled up, Kyle would only feel that life would be boring in the future. Fortunately, the last words of His Royal Highness Roland made him excited, and those words still lingered in his ears. Don't show that expression. Each element on the periodic table is arranged according to a rule. You can completely rely on yourself to fill it up. Rule, arrangement. Do you mean that unknown elements can also be derived, just like the derivation of alchemy formulas? Yes, even if you have never seen them, you can still describe their appearance and characteristics. Then, what is this rule? Chapter 273. The deeper they went into the mine, the more humid the environment inside the cave became. Sylvie carefully avoided the water dripping from the top of her head, holding the torch and slowly moving forward in the cave. Even if there was no light, the eye of truth wouldn't be blocked by the darkness. She only did this to save her magic. We've reached the fork. Nightingale, who was walking in the front, stopped. Which cave is this? Number 23 is the first fork in the second door. Lightning took out the record book and glanced at it. I hope this is the end, Sylvie muttered and opened her eyes, which were completely shaped by magic. The left side is out of the mining area, no ore. The right side is the same. Lightning wrote down the result. So, this cave has one last door left to check. Let's go. Nightingale went from the front of the team to the back, and led everyone back the way they came. Her ability didn't seem to be as simple as invisibility. Sylvie could only faintly see Nightingale's magic changes, but was unable to capture her figure and movements. According to Lightning's introduction, she was the strongest combat witch in the Witch Cooperation Association. This might be the reason why Roland asked her to follow him. There were rumors that this mine was once the lair of an ancient monster, and there had been several cases of miners disappearing before. Before they set off, His Royal Highness had repeatedly told them to be careful, and if they encountered an uncertain situation, they should first retreat from the mine, and then report to him. Sylvie didn't think much of it. There were no monsters that could escape the detection of the magic eye. She could even see the animal carcasses and the wriggling soft-bodied worms in the stone walls clearly. The expedition had a total of 4 people. In addition to herself, Nightingale, and Lightning, there was also a little girl named Lucia. Every time she found an ore, she would turn it into a variety of fragments, and then carefully classify them and put them in her pocket, saying that she would give them to His Royal Highness to identify. Lightning was responsible for drawing the topographic map of the mine. Of course, according to her own words, no adventure could be without her. Her proud tone reminded Sylvie of the captain who was temporarily stationed on Sleeping Island. Cave 23 was a huge and deep cave near the bottom of the mining area. After a few hundred steps, it divided into 3 forks. If they continued to go deeper along these forks, they would find more branches. However, by then, they would have almost extended out of the mining area, and the possibility of finding a mineral vein was very low. Therefore, they would only go this far. Returning to the first fork, which was the door Lightning had recorded, Sylvie used her ability to observe the situation of the 3 doors of Cave 23. The wider the scope of the Eye of Truth, the greater the magic consumption, and a heavy burden on the body, so she chose to observe at each fork, one at a time. Another 3 doors. There's no ore, and there's... She paused for a moment. There are 5 forks, and one of them seems to lead downwards. Down? Lightning repeated. That's right. Sylvie looked again, the slender passage not long after turning a corner, heading straight to the mining area. When she wanted to continue to observe along this fork, a strong dizziness rushed into her mind, cutting off her connection with the magic eye. I think it may lead to a deposit. But this explanation was very far-fetched. The intricate caves in the North Slope mine were obviously not artificially excavated, so they would not specifically look for ore. The unknown vein they had found before was sandwiched between two forks, and if not for the eye of truth, which could see through obstacles, it would be impossible to find the pile of metal and stone hidden under the stone walls and soil. No matter what it is, we'll know once we go and see, Nightingale shrugged. The group of people entered the third door of the cave, and after about a quarter of an hour, they reached the end of the passage. They saw that the passage here was divided into 5, the narrowest of which could not allow people to walk, so they could only crawl in. And the strange passage that Sylvie had seen before was located in the middle of the 5 forks. The terrain suddenly turned downwards, almost forming a steep slope with the ground they were now standing on. It looks quite deep. Nightingale shone a torch. I always feel that the caves here are somewhat similar to those I saw in the impassable cliff. After the inspection, we should hurry back. Lucia could not help but grab Nightingale's arm. I don't like it here. I always feel that there is something staring at us from inside the cave. There is nothing in the cave, except mud and stones, Sylvie said, although she also did not like this quiet and damp place, but her ability told her that there was no danger here. The 4 forks on the left and right are all without ore, out of the mining area. She quickly scanned the straight forks, moved her eyes to the one in the middle, and then slightly startled. Huh? What's wrong? Lightning asked. I can't see the situation below. You can't see? The little girl was surprised. Is it because you're too tired that your ability failed? Let's take a rest. No, it's not a problem with your ability. Sylvie closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, all she could see was darkness, as if she had been deprived of her vision. She endured the headache and further expanded her field of vision, but the result was still the same. The surrounding soil was clearly visible, only the middle was completely shrouded in endless darkness, as thick as ink. Something is blocking my view. All of you stay here and don't move. Nightingale pulled out 2 silver weapons. I will go down to explore the situation. I will be back soon. Don't go. Sylvie pressed her hand on her swollen forehead to stop her. There is only one thing that can produce such an effect. Even if you go, you will be in danger. What is it? God's Stone of Retaliation, she said, gritting her teeth. There is a God's Stone of Retaliation underground, and it is the kind that can cover the entire area. When Roland learned of this news, he immediately mobilized the soldiers of the First Army to enter the North Slope mine. And the final result of the investigation was just as Sylvie had guessed. The deep cave at the bottom of the mine contained a huge amount of God's Stone of Retaliation. After confirming that there was no danger, Roland also entered the 23rd cave under the protection of his guards. He also wanted to see with his own eyes what a God's Stone of Retaliation that could cover the entire bottom of the mountain looked like. Your Highness, please be careful, Carter warned. The exit is in front of us. You can't use magic here. It is safer for you to stay above. Roland looked back at Anna, Nightingale and Lightning who were following behind him. Isn't it good to learn from Sylvie? Even without magic, I am still more powerful than you. If you can come, then of course I can come. Nightingale curled her lips. Wherever there is an adventure, there will be me, Lightning said with her chest out. Anna didn't say anything, she just stared straight at Roland. Seeing those clear eyes that reflected the light of the torches, Roland knew that whatever he said would be useless. Well, he sighed, you must follow me, don't stray too far away. Walking along the slope of the cave to the end, Roland suddenly understood what the chief knight meant by the exit. His line of sight suddenly became clear, an incomparably deep cave appeared in front of him. Chapter 274. Roland quickly estimated the volume of the underground cave. The bottom was almost the size of a football field, surrounded by steep mountain walls. The path leading to this place was right in the middle of the mountain wall, and next to the entrance of the cave was a narrow stone staircase, extending all the way down. I guess this staircase wasn't created by you. He crouched down and put the torch close to the ground. Under the illumination of the fire, the traces of axe and knife carvings on the stone steps were very obvious, and there were also a lot of stone chips and dust accumulated in the carvings. Of course not, Your Highness. When we found this place, the stone steps were already here. Carter shrugged. I guess this thing has been here for decades. Or hundreds of years, Anna suddenly said. I also think so, Lightning nodded. Border Town has been established for less than 70 years, the stone staircase is unlikely to be related to the locals or the kingdom. Were there people in the western region hundreds of years ago? Carter questioned. Grey Castle hadn't even been established yet. Roland patted the knight's shoulder. 450 years ago, there was a group of people forgotten by history. Then he raised the torch. Let's go down and take a look. The soldiers of the First Army had already surrounded the bottom of the cave in 2s and 3s. He took the knight and the witch straight to the side of the god's stone of retaliation. Only when standing at the foot of the stone pillar could they deeply feel the huge size of the god's stone. When they opened their arms, they couldn't even reach a tenth of its size, and they had to look up to see its top. The highest purple god's stone of retaliation was nearly 30 meters tall, almost equivalent to an 8 or 9-story high house. In theory, a stone that could emit light by itself was either a radioactive material or a fluorescent component, but the light of the god's stone of retaliation obviously had nothing to do with either. The former's light came from the ionization phenomenon of the air caused by the decay of the element itself. The shorter the half-life, the greater the brightness. According to this brightness, the soldiers who entered first would only be able to hold on for a few minutes before dying from the ionizing radiation. The latter, on the other hand, needed to be exposed to light before it could emit light. There was no light source in the depths of the ground, so it was obviously unable to support its continuous emitting of cold light. Roland also noticed that although the god's stone had the usual prismatic shape of a crystal, there were no crystal patterns on its surface. Instead, it was as smooth as flat glass. A thumb-sized god's stone of retaliation in the church can be sold for several golden dragon coins. A god's stone of retaliation as big as this can practically empty the coffers of the 4 kingdoms. Carter couldn't help but sigh. Sold to the nobles to kill witches. Nightingale glared at him. I didn't say that. The chief knight subconsciously looked away. This is the first time I've seen a god's stone of retaliation in this color. Shouldn't it be white and transparent? Lightning curiously looked at the stone pillar. If I bring one back, will I not need to light candles at night? I'd rather light a dozen candles in a stuffy room than use it for illumination, Nightingale said, crossing her arms over her chest. For a witch, it's a cage, a shackle, an accomplice of the church. It would be great if this damn stone didn't exist in this world. Well, Sister Nightingale, you won't be at night anyway. The little girl licked her lips, picked up a stone, and looked at Roland. Can I take one back as a trophy for my adventure? Roland nodded. If you don't dislike this kind of thing. She swung the stone in her hand, and with all her strength hit the corner of the prism, only to hear a ding sound. The stone was broken, but not even a scratch was left on the prism. The knight couldn't help but exclaim, "What's going on? Aren't God's stones of retaliation fragile?" Perhaps this one's light is different. Lightning brushed off the stone chips in her hand, and took out a dagger from her waist bag. She tried to scratch the prism for a while, but even after scraping, cutting, and picking, it was still in vain. Roland felt something was wrong. He signaled to Nightingale, "You try it." The latter nodded, pulled out a revolver, and directly pulled the trigger on another prism. A huge roar suddenly echoed in the bottom of the cave, and the place where the god's stone of retaliation was hit emitted a few sparks. After the smoke dispersed, the group walked over, only to see that the bullet had only left a shallow mark on the surface of the god's stone of retaliation. This meant that, in terms of strength, it had already surpassed a homogeneous steel plate. Even the flintlock is useless. Carter frowned. Then how did the church cut it down, polish it, and sell it? No one could answer this question, and this was also not in line with everyone's usual impression. At least, Roland had once used a brick to break the god's lock of retaliation, such as the one tied around Anna's neck, and only needed 2 or 3 hits to turn the crystal-clear stone into a pile of white powder. Anna, who had been silent all this time, suddenly opened her mouth. "Your Royal Highness, do you remember the treasure map drawn by Philin Eltec, the Light of Dawn?" Treasure map? Roland stared blankly. He vaguely remembered that on the map, there was a triangle that occupied more than half of the map, and the other 3 points were pointing at the holy city of Tequila, the stone tower of the concealing forest, and the end of the North Slope Mountain. Wait, the foot of the North Slope Mountain? Suddenly, a lightning flashed through his mind. Could it be? I think that point is not pointing at the North Slope mine, but here, Anna slowly said, this underground cave contains a large number of God's stone of retaliation. After a careful search, in addition to a large pile of indestructible God's stone, they did not find anything else of value. Not to mention ancient books or remains, even the tools to carve the stone stairs were not left behind, which was very incredible. According to the current level of technology, if they wanted to carve a staircase on a steep stone wall, it would definitely be a huge and arduous project. Such as accidental falls, loss of tools, and so on should not be uncommon. But in addition to the stone, there was only stone, as if they had thoroughly cleaned the cave before they had evacuated. When Roland returned to his office, he called for Scroll, and reproduced the drawing of the Dawn Knight on the Book of Illusion. It was similar to the pattern in his memory. The southernmost point was indeed at the foot of the North Slope Mountain. If Anna's guess was correct, is it possible that this is the map left behind by the church when they were looking for a new vein of God's stone of retaliation? But why did they spend a lot of effort to carve a stone staircase that led directly to the bottom of the cave, and then abandon everything? If the church had established a border church 450 years ago, I'm afraid that today's border town would be completely different. According to the price of the God's stone of retaliation and its use, this mine didn't seem like a resource that could be casually abandoned. Chapter 275. After dinner, Candle walked into the castle hall early. Every time night fell, Teacher Scroll would give a lecture in the hall. Unlike the aristocratic academies in the big cities, the students who came to listen were all witches of the Witch Cooperation Association. But she wasn't the first one to arrive at the classroom. Evelyn was already sitting at the long table and waving at her. "Did His Highness Roland recently give you any tasks?" Candle had just sat down when Evelyn couldn't wait to ask. She remembered that when she had just arrived, she had dryly called him Lord. Candle secretly laughed in her heart. "Yes, he asked me to use my ability on some grotesquely shaped metal lumps, solidifying them at room temperature, but I don't know what use they have." Is that so?" Her eyes dimmed. "His Highness still hasn't asked me to do anything. Is there no regulation on the content of the practice?" Candle asked strangely. "No, I just casually practice by myself." Evelyn shook her head. "He only occasionally asks me to taste the newly formulated liquor. Maybe this is what His Highness likes. You have been in a tavern, so you are very familiar with the taste of all kinds of wine. There aren't many witches like this." "But you don't need a witch to taste wine," she protested. "A golden dragon's salary is enough to hire a professional winemaker." "Ah." Candle patted the other's shoulder. "I think His Highness definitely has his own plans. Scroll also comforted me like this, but even I don't know what I can do with this ability. I can't just turn water into wine out of thin air. Is it to make the best wine to sell? But the commoners can only afford to drink poor ale, and the nobles have different tastes." Evelyn put her chin on the table, and said in frustration, "Moreover, the wine His Highness makes is getting more and more unpleasant. I have suggested adding water or fruit juice to blend, but he only seems to want to make the strongest wine." Candle didn't know what to say for a while. In this regard, she and Evelyn could be said to be in the same boat. After going to Sleeping Island, they could only do chores most of the time. As the fish oil became more abundant, solidified candles became dispensable. Lady Tilly even forbade drinking. In the early days, when life was tight, the resources were often distributed according to one's ability. Sometimes, Candle could only get a grilled fish that was not covered with salt. She didn't think there was anything wrong with this practice, and she was also willing to give more food to the witches who consumed a lot of magic power. But the fact that witches were divided into different groups and had a vague sense of rejection made her feel a little uncomfortable. Fortunately, Lady Tilly took good care of them and apologized for this method of distribution. She also promised to adjust it when the resources were abundant in the future, so the witches did not reject them too obviously. But in Border Town, this kind of situation had almost never happened. The witches all sat at the same table and enjoyed the meal together with His Royal Highness, wearing the same clothes and using the same things. The most important thing was that, regardless of whether they were powerful or not, they all regarded each other as a whole, which could be seen from their daily interactions. Although she had only been in Border Town for a short period of 2 weeks, she had already deeply felt this point. They really regarded each other as their own sisters. This made Candle feel very envious. When all the witches sat down one after another, Teacher Scroll came in holding a stack of white paper. Today I won't teach you new content, I will conduct a comprehensive test on what you have learned. What is that? Lightning was the first to raise her hand. Cuckoo. Maggie followed closely behind. You have been studying for 3 months now, so His Royal Highness thinks it is necessary to test your learning results. Scroll laughed. All the questions have been listed on these papers, divided into 3 parts: kingdom language, mathematics, and nature. There are a total of 60 questions. If you answer correctly, you will get points, and if you answer incorrectly, you will lose points. Of course, if you don't understand the questions, you can't raise your hand to ask. I believe that you have already mastered the basics of reading and writing, otherwise even if you know the answer, you will not be able to answer. She paused. By the way, His Royal Highness said that only those who answer more than half of the questions correctly will be able to enjoy the weekend afternoon ice cream dessert. If your score is lower than this limit, you will be disqualified from afternoon tea. Candle heard a clatter behind her, turned around, and saw Nightingale with a dumbfounded look. The charcoal pen that had fallen to the ground had broken into 2 pieces. In addition, His Royal Highness also specifically said that the 5 witches from Sleeping Island are not included, so you can stay with everyone to answer the questions, or you can take a day off. Scroll looked at Candle, Evelyn, and the others. No matter what the final score is, you will be able to enjoy the delicious afternoon tea. Phew, Evelyn patted her chest, turned her head and whispered, I can't even recognize the words. I thought the ice cream would definitely be gone. Honey and Lotus very happily got up and saluted Scroll, then left the hall. In addition to Sylvie, who was not feeling well, didn't come, so only she and Evelyn were left among the Sleeping Island witches. Do you want to stay? Candle asked in a low voice. I want to try, the other nodded. Didn't His Royal Highness Roland say that knowledge can make my ability evolve? If I don't put more effort in this aspect, I'm afraid I will never be able to match them. She revealed a sly smile. These days after class I have been practicing calligraphy in my room. Lily and Mystery Moon have also taught me how to read and write some commonly used words. Mentioning this, the frustration in her tones suddenly dispersed a lot, and her eyes became sparkling, which made Candle couldn't help but raise the corner of her mouth. Is that so? Then I will also try. Your Royal Highness, the results of this test have come out. Scroll handed the summary sheet to Roland. You've worked hard. The recent new discoveries in the North Slope mine made him puzzled, and it was even difficult to concentrate on his daily work, so he simply shifted his attention to something more relaxing. Hey, Nightingale's results actually passed. Yes, and her score is even among the top. Among them, she got a full score for the kingdom's language, Scroll said with a smile. After all, most of the questions you gave are very simple, and she already knows how to read and write, so compared to the witches who have to learn from the beginning, she is naturally much better. TSK, Tisk, Roland smacked his lips. I thought that this test would make her eat less sweets. Before his voice fell, he felt his shoulder being pinched hard. In short, the results look good. All the members of the Witch Union scored more than 60 points. It seems that your education is very effective. This is also inseparable from their efforts. Roland looked down. Only 2 witches from Sleeping Island participated in the test? Yes, among them, Evelyn scored 5 points, Candle 36 points. The latter should have a certain foundation. The majority of her points came from the kingdom's language, she replied. Only 2 weeks of lessons, they were already able to get points from the part of the test that wasn't written. The individual quality of the witches was really amazing, worthy of the continuous improvement of magic both internally and externally. His own witches were also equally outstanding, like Lily, Hummingbird, Mystery Moon and the others. They had only used 3 months to go from being illiterate to basically mastering reading and writing. This alone had surpassed most ordinary people. Chapter 276. Lucia carefully placed the 3 iron ingots on the bedroom floor, closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and reviewed all the experiences she had learned in the past in her mind. Then she stretched out her hands and released her ability to surround the target. This was the practice method that Anna had come up with for her. The 3 iron ingots were also specially made by Anna. Each of them contained different components, such as silver, copper, and lead, as well as some impurities. What she needed to do now was to reduce them to their elemental form while retaining the impurities, and find the iron ingot with the highest silver content. This meant that she had to control the output of her magic power and only operate on the target once. Otherwise, the impurities would be further disintegrated. This was also the reason why she felt that her ability was difficult to control when she was at home in Valencia. It was the same paper, but the products produced were completely different. This was because she did not understand the relationship between the amount of magic power and the effect of her ability, which led to the paper being continuously divided several times, and finally, most of the raw materials turned into water and gas. After coming to Border Town, the first lesson that the witches taught her was to control her magic power during practice. Lucia did not believe that something that could not be seen or touched could be accurately controlled until Anna demonstrated the length of the black fire on the spot. Only then did she realize how wrong she was. Anna could even change the size and thickness of the black fire by adjusting the output of magic power, and every time, she could do it accurately. "Sister, are you practicing again?" Belle curiously poked her head out of the bed. "We just finished lunch." Lucia's hand shook, and the iron ingot suddenly turned into several puddles of powder. "I told you not to disturb me when I'm using my ability." She turned around and knocked on her sister's head. "Focus on your book." "I don't understand." Belle pouted. "I don't understand half of the words. I can't read and write like you. That's why you have to read more. Many words have similar structures. Even if you haven't seen them before, you should be able to guess their meaning. Literacy itself is a process of familiarizing yourself." "Okay." Belle retracted her head. Lucia refocused on the second iron ingot and slowly controlled the outflow of magic power. In her mind, she imagined it as a thin layer of gauze, gently covering the target and wrapping it evenly. "Hey, I'm here." The door was suddenly pushed open with a squeak, and a blonde woman flashed into the room. "Hey, are you practicing your ability?" "Sister Nightingale." Belle let out a carefree cry. The second iron ingot turned into powder again. Lucia sighed and put all the metal scraps on the ground into her leather bag. She felt that she might not be able to practice at noon today. "Here, this is for you." A stick of ice cream with a rich milky smell was placed in front of her. "Thank you." Lucia took the ice cream. "But isn't this only given out during afternoon tea?" Nightingale patted her chest proudly and said, "This is the reward I asked for from His Highness. By the way, you have a share too." Nightingale handed the other one to Belle, causing the little girl to burst into laughter. "Sister Nightingale treats me the best." Lucia thought helplessly. "This girl, once she has something delicious, she has forgotten about me." However, in the instant that the ice cream entered her mouth, she felt like if she were in her younger sister's shoes, her reaction would most likely be the same as Xiao Ling's. The rich flavor of honey and milk melted in her mouth, and the cool and refreshing texture of the ice cream combined the two to further enhance the sweetness of the flavor. Even if she swallowed it, she could still feel a trace of coolness between her lips and teeth. No one could resist its delicious taste, especially in the hot summer. No wonder His Highness only gave out ice cream during afternoon tea on weekends. Such a unique style of food must be very expensive. At least, she had never heard of such a dessert in Valencia. Thinking of this, Lucia could not help but ask, "How did you ask for it from His Highness?" Hee. Nightingale curled up the corner of her mouth. "I ranked third in the test, just behind Vendy and Leaf, but His Highness Roland thought that I couldn't pass. There was such a big deviation from the actual situation, so I naturally had to ask him for a reward." "I see." She hesitated for a moment. "Then, what about me?" 68 points. "I don't know where I ranked." So low," Lucia said dejectedly. Out of a total of 120 points, she had only answered a little more than half of them correctly, and this was based on the fact that she was already literate. "It's not bad." Nightingale patted her head. "After all, you haven't been in class for a long time, so your math and natural science parts must be a little worse. If you have any questions, you can ask me." "What about me? Can I ask?" Belle raised her hand. "Of course," Nightingale replied with a smile. "You're welcome anytime. When I pass the primary test, will I be able to choose my own job?" "It's still too early for you. His Highness said that the minimum age to work is 14. You're only 10 years old. What's the hurry?" Lucia stared at her. The little girl did not want to be outdone. "I also want to help you share your burden as soon as possible. Things like getting married and having children will cost a lot of money. If you don't have enough money, your life will be very hard." "Who did you hear this from?" Lucia asked with her hand on her forehead. "Dad, he often nags that he won't be able to support us." Nightingale could not help but laugh. "If you can work, where will you choose to go?" "The chemistry laboratory." Belle raised her hand. "I want to become an alchemist and get the title of sage. I want to receive everyone's admiration and praise. It's better not to." She shook her head. "The laboratory is actually very dangerous." "Dangerous?" The two sisters were surprised at the same time. "Yes." Nightingale spread out her hands. "Not only does it often deal with acid, but sometimes it also explodes. Even the chief alchemist can't avoid accidents. Last time, 4 of his fingers were blown off. If it weren't for Nana, I'm afraid that Mr. Kyle Sichi would never be able to pick up those bottles and cans again." She paused. "Moreover, His Highness recently seems to be planning to develop a new kind of gunpowder. Even he thinks that this thing is extremely dangerous, so he needs to vacate a separate laboratory to prepare it." "Well, in that case, do you have any good suggestions?" Lucia hugged Belle and made up her mind. She would never let her sister work in such a terrible place. "Of course, it's to enter the city hall and become a civil servant." "Civil servant?" she repeated. "Ahem, this is what His Highness says when he talks to himself. In layman's terms, it's a city hall official." Nightingale coughed twice. "It's stable and safe. The salary is above average, but the prospects are good. When I become a department head, the salary won't be lower than a witch's." "I see," Lucia said thoughtfully. "Sister Nightingale, do you like His Highness?" Belle shouted. "There are a lot of words in your words that His Highness said. Mom said that only people who they like very much will often talk about it." Her sister's question made Lucia's face stiffen. "Damn it, how can this kind of thing be asked directly? It's too rude. Even ordinary friends can't be asked directly, not to mention that the other party is a senior that I respect." She hurriedly covered Belle's mouth. When she was about to apologize, she heard Nightingale frankly answer. Chapter 277. Genius 1 second. Remember, if you want to go, say net, to provide you with wonderful novels to read. On the way to see His Royal Highness with the oar, Lucia's ears were still echoing with Nightingale's words. She had to say, she was shocked by the other party's calm attitude. Although she didn't understand the matter of feelings, but a witch and a prince, it was simply impossible for them to be together, right? In this way, shouldn't she carefully hide her own thoughts at the bottom of her heart, not letting the other party know? Moreover, why did she, as the audience, feel so embarrassed and flushed? Standing at the door of the office, Lucia took a deep breath, then pushed the door open and entered. Your Royal Highness, I brought the oar. Let me see, Roland said with a yawn. The ruler of Border Town looked the same as usual, with sleepy eyes. He should have just woken up from a nap. He leaned against the back of the chair, with a natural expression and an easygoing tone, completely unlike the other nobles who were fierce. Lucia's inexplicable nervousness also relaxed a lot. She took out the ore particles found in the North Slope mine from her leather bag and placed them on the desk one by one. After going through her ability to decompose, these particles looked almost the same. The color was either silver or gray. Probably only the knowledgeable His Royal Highness would be able to distinguish what kind of ore they were. She saw the prince frowning for a long time, weighing each of them in his palm, then carefully looking at the sunlight behind him. Finally, he waved his hand and said, Ahem, I will give these ores to Mr. Sichi to identify. You continue to go to the North Slope backyard to practice your ability. If you don't understand, you can ask Anna. Huh, even His Royal Highness doesn't know? Lucia quickly bowed her head and said, yes. Just as she was about to leave the office, Roland stopped her again. Oh, right, your test results are good. You scored 68 points and ranked 9th. It's really not easy to have such a performance after learning with everyone for only a month. You have to keep it up. Also. He paused. In the next test, I hope Belle can also participate with everyone. Yes. Lucia replied excitedly. After watching the little girl happily bow and leave, Roland looked at the metal particles on the table and sighed. He was still too naive. He thought that by decomposing the rocks into elemental substances, he would be able to figure out what kind of mineral veins were hidden in the North Slope mine. However, the facts made him understand the huge gap between mechanical engineering and geology. These rocks would eventually be separated into 3 or 4 types of metals, and the ones with the most amount could be considered as ores of this type of metal. But their color and shape were almost the same. For example, iron, aluminum, magnesium, and potassium were all silver-white metals in their high-purity state. It was too difficult to distinguish them with the naked eye. Love go small say net chew. It was better to leave this problem to the chief alchemist. After all, using chemical reactions to verify the characteristics of the materials was much more reliable than making wild guesses. After dealing with this matter, Roland took out a piece of paper and began to plan how to deal with this year's months of the demons. Seeing that the summer was coming to an end, the 3 months of autumn were his last preparation time. In addition to resisting the invasion of the demonic beasts from the west, he also had to pay attention to Timothy and the church from the east. Compared to the previous year, when he was struggling to make ends meet, the population and income under his rule had increased significantly. The iron production was also gradually increasing, and there were more than a dozen witches. He was completely confident that he could turn the western region into an impassable iron wall. According to last year's combat experience, the biggest threat to the city wall was undoubtedly the hybrid demonic beasts. Especially when the enemy had a thick carapace that was difficult for bullets to penetrate, he could either use explosives or send witches out of the city to fight. Either way, the danger would be greatly increased. In addition, most of the enemies he faced were cavalry and infantry, so he had never seen the siege weapons of this era. If the other side could set up a torsion catapult, or a more advanced counterweight catapult, he was afraid that he would encounter a lot of trouble. After all, it was very inconvenient to load the cannon from the front and shoot downward. Every time he reloaded, he would need to raise the muzzle again, and the shells could easily roll out of the barrel. It was imperative to develop a more powerful artillery. Roland thought about it and listed the requirements he needed on the paper. First of all, it should have enough range and power to penetrate the carapace of the hybrid demonic beasts from a kilometer away. Second, it must be rear-loaded, able to freely adjust the angle of elevation, and also have the ability to fire quickly. Finally, in order to reduce the time of repeated research and development, the design should consider that one cannon could be used for multiple purposes. It could be used as a fixed battery to suppress the enemy, or it could be directly pulled to the ship and used as the main weapon of the future shallow-water heavy gunboat. Therefore, it should be a heavy cannon with a large caliber and a long barrel. The first thing that came to Roland's mind was the 15 or 16-inch behemoth on the battleship, with a range of up to 10 kilometers, and a single shot could dig a few meters deep hole in the ground, but he quickly rejected this unrealistic idea. Although there was no problem with the processing, with the current level of materials in Border Town, at least 9 out of 10 cannons would explode. Even if the wall of the tube was thickened to more than 1 meter, it would still lose its practical value because it couldn't be moved. At present, he could only produce high-purity wrought iron and ordinary steel, so it was better to be conservative. In the end, Roland set the caliber at the sacred number of 152 millimeters. The cannon used a vertical wedge breech, similar to a sliding door. When it was lowered, the barrel was exposed, and the shell was loaded. When it was repositioned, it was locked, and the gunpowder gas erupted forward. Compared with the screw breech and the horizontal wedge breech, it had the fastest firing speed, and the principle was very simple. He had already memorized its mechanical structure. However, in order to achieve a fast firing speed, the cannon had to be equipped with a recoil mechanism. Simply put, it was like 2 pumps, one filled with oil, and the other with a recoil spring or gas. When the muzzle was recoiled, the 2 connecting rods were pulled, and at the same time, the oil and the recoil spring were compressed. The oil was used to cushion the recoil, and the recoil spring was used to store power. After the firing, the barrel would be pushed back to its original position. Finally, it was the cannonball. Now that he had used the sacred cannon, he naturally couldn't be satisfied with the clumsy solid iron ball and paper-wrapped canister shooting. So, for the sake of security, Roland decided to develop 2 kinds of fixed shells at the same time. One was an enlarged version of the bullet, with a solid metal warhead, and the other was an explosive warhead with a trigger fuse, which was later known as the howitzer. After all, the latter had a certain technical difficulty. It was necessary to repeatedly test the reliability of the fuse, and it was impossible to guarantee that it would be ready for the army before the months of the demons. Therefore, it was necessary to first produce the former to solve the problem. Even if it was a solid warhead, it would be easy to deal with the slow-moving thick-armored demonic beasts and the stationary siege equipment. Of course, no matter what kind of shell it was, it would consume a lot of smokeless gunpowder. Before the 2 acids could be mass-produced, the new cannon could only be used as a special weapon. It was impossible to achieve a hardy artillery coverage. At this moment, a guard pushed open the door and came in. "Your Highness, there is a secret letter from King's City." Roland put down the quill and opened the envelope. From beginning to end, the letter had no signature, and the handwriting was very unfamiliar, but the content of the first sentence showed that this letter was undoubtedly sent by Theo. Today, a team of about 1,000 people will leave King's City, heading in the direction of the Western Territory. To be continued, your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 278. Longsong Stronghold, Theater Performance Hall. With the continuous whistles and cheers of the audience, the curtain slowly fell. May wiped the sweat from her forehead and looked at Irene, who was looking at her with excitement and expectation, and nodded slightly. This affirmation made Irene cheer out loud. When the curtain fell, she couldn't help but rush forward and hug May. "Ha ha ha, I really did a good job." "So annoying," May rolled her eyes and pushed her away. "You've made some progress, you can go on stage alone." "Miss May, then, what about me?" Rosia, another witch, asked cautiously. You're still far from it, she said without hesitation. Your expression is stiff, your movements are slow, your lines are not emotional, you made 2 mistakes in the second act, and 1 mistake in the fourth act. This is a typical case of not memorizing the script. Ha, Miss May is really strict, Gate touched the back of his head and said, but the audience's response seems to be very good. Listen, the applause hasn't subsided yet. Most of these people are civilians who have never been to the theater, the play is a new thing for them, May said bluntly. If it was a normal performance, those few mistakes would be enough to make the nobles boo. She paused. If you want to go on the road of being an actor, don't be satisfied with temporary success. Only by constantly improving yourself can you stand firm on the stage. Yes, thank you for your guidance. Everyone bowed their heads in unison. May sighed, here they go again, I obviously can't be regarded as a drama mentor for this group of people. But she was too lazy to care about such trivial things. Well, continue to work hard. The Witch Diary is scheduled until September, we still have several rounds to perform. This is a rare opportunity, don't miss it. Yes. A month ago, May received a notice from the Ministry of Education that all the members of the cast should go to Longsong Stronghold to perform. The so-called members were the miscellaneous actors who had followed her to the border, plus Irene Eltek. Perhaps His Royal Highness and his agent, Perot, had reached an agreement. The theater had specifically cleared out a series of vacancies for the crew to perform the Diary of a Witch trilogy. Therefore, this group of amateur actors who were not even considered as rookies openly stepped onto the big stage of the Fortress Theater. Usually, it was unlikely that they would be chosen even if they appeared in a supporting role. But now, they appeared on stage as important characters, and they even performed hand in hand with the star of the Western region. One could not help but sigh at the fickleness of fate. Back at the backstage, May could not help but frown. They saw a group of people making a racket in the lounge, as if they were arguing about something. When they saw May and her group appear, more than 10 people surrounded them under the lead of a woman. These people were all actors of the theater, and May also knew the woman who was leading them. Her name was Bella Dean, and she was a famous actress who belonged to a different crew than herself. Some nobles had once thought that she was the biggest competitor for the star of the Western region, but in fact, whether it was acting or reputation, she had always firmly surpassed her. Guess what I saw? Bella bypassed May and walked step by step to the front of Irene. A group of lousy actors who sneaked back from a small place in the countryside. What did you say? Irene asked with a puzzled face. Gate, Rosia, and the others' faces stiffened, and they could not help but take 2 steps back. Pfft, Bella covered her mouth and said, look, she still doesn't know her own identity. These words aroused a burst of laughter from the crowd. Then I'll be frank with you, Longsong Stronghold is a big city that simply isn't a place you should come to, and the Stronghold Theater also doesn't welcome this kind of inferior and vulgar third-rate performance. What Diary of a Witch? It's nothing more than the struggles and howls of a few stray dogs. Who would be interested in watching this kind of disgusting play? It would be better for you to roll back to Border Town as soon as possible. You, Irene suddenly blushed, what do you mean by third-rate performance? Didn't you hear the applause of the audience? Ha, the audience? Bella sneered disdainfully, you call those people who deal with mud, hose, and furnaces every day an audience? Don't laugh my teeth off. Even if you caught a few monkeys for a stroll, they would still cheer loudly, okay? If it weren't for the free tickets, would they have the spare money to watch your performance? Irene opened her mouth, but did not know how to refute. In order to arrange for your 3 performances every week, the theater's income has continuously dropped, and even we have been affected. As long as your play is arranged together, the nobles will not come to see it. Bella raised her voice, who would be willing to sit in a chair full of mud and oil? If it were me, I would also not want to step into a messy theater after a group of country bumpkins have a carnival. The other side is obviously looking for trouble, May thought. The sudden insertion of the small town's cast has indeed squeezed out many opportunities, but Bella Dean has not been affected too much. According to the news from some acquaintances, after she left Longsong Stronghold, the theater intended to make her the new star of the Western region, so it was naturally impossible to cancel the play she starred in. So, the purpose of Bella's action was very obvious. She seemed to be scolding Irene and the others, but in fact, she was targeting herself. If these people backed down, she would not be able to play the Diary of a Witch alone, and could only return to Border Town dejectedly. In this way, she would be equal to defeating herself in a head-on confrontation, and at the same time restore the opportunities of other actors, so her prestige would inevitably rise, and thus establish the position of the new generation of star of the Western region. But she would never let herself become a stepping stone for others. The theater's income has dropped, are you serious? May turned around and casually said, because of the exemption of tickets, the theater can't make ends meet. How could you come up with such a naive conclusion? The theater operator has undoubtedly reached an agreement with His Highness the Prince and His Excellency Perot, so the shortfall will naturally be covered by Border Town City Hall. This is a business contract, not a game. You really should use your brain instead of shouting here based on your imagination. What nonsense are you talking about? In addition, it's only you, a group of inferior actors with low acting skills, that's all. She smiled slightly. I have performed in King City's Ablon Theater, which is an open-air theater. On the day of the performance, it happened to be raining, but the nobles still filled all the seats. So, you say that because of the commoners, they are unwilling to come to watch the performance? No, they just don't like to specially come to watch a group of monkeys perform. The scene fell into a strange silence. Not only did no one stand up to accuse her, no one even tried to defend themselves. Finally, you said that, The Witch Diary, is inferior and vulgar, and that it is the struggle and wail of a stray dog. May raised the corner of her mouth, but her voice was extremely cold. I may have forgotten to tell you, but the script of this story was written by His Highness the Prince. Do you want to say that His Highness's idea is inferior and vulgar? Insulting the royal family and nobles is punishable by cutting off the tongue. Now, do you still intend to stick to your point of view? She looked at the crowd behind Bella, or perhaps some of you want to try. Under her gaze, more than 10 actors stepped back one after another. Enough. Bella gritted her teeth. Since you went to Border Town, you shouldn't have come back. Do you think I don't know, May? The reason why you went to that broken place was not to see that idiot Irene, but for daybreak. Slap. Her voice stopped abruptly, and a bright red palm print appeared on her left cheek. Bella touched her face in disbelief. You dare to hit, phew, I was too impulsive. May took a deep breath. In this way, I may encounter some trouble. Sure enough, the 2 actors behind Bella walked out. Miss May, what you did is a bit too much. Don't you know the importance of an actor's appearance? I think you should at least apologize to her. Apologize? Doesn't that prove that I did something wrong? May sneered at the bottom of her heart. Although she was impulsive, she didn't think that she needed to apologize at all. She looked at the 2 men with a gloomy face, and couldn't help but think of what Carter Lannis had said. Men may be strong, but they also have many weaknesses. If their eyes and throat are attacked, they will instantly lose their resistance, and of course, there is also the area between their legs. As long as you are agile and decisive, it is not impossible to knock down a man who is much stronger than you. Although she didn't know how she talked to him about this, she was ready to kick them. She just needed to wait for the 2 men to come a little closer. At this moment, the lounge door was violently pushed open, and an armored knight walked in, followed by several warriors with long spears. When they entered the room, they had already pointed their spears at the crowd. I heard that someone here is slandering His Highness Roland and plotting against His Highness crew. Chapter 279. The conflict ended very quickly. Seeing the fierce knight, no one dared to say another word. Most of the actors were fence-sitters, otherwise there would not have been a dispute at the beginning. In the face of the famous May, not everyone had the courage to stand up against her. Now the situation had become even more one-sided. Bella was directly taken out of the lounge by two men. After a while, only Carter and the border town crew members were left in the large room. "Thank you so much for your help, Gate," and the others bowed. "You're really amazing. You forced her to speechless in 2 or 3 hits. Irene held May's hand and exclaimed, "And that slap, it completely stunned her." Then she turned to the chief knight and saluted. "Sir Carter, how come you are in Longsong Stronghold? I'm also very curious about that." May shrugged, but her heart was relieved. "Because of His Highness's order." Carter spread out his hands. "Can I buy you a drink? This is where you live." The chief knight looked around cautiously. "Well, it's very ordinary, right?" May took out a bottle of white wine from the cupboard and poured him a small cup. "The pub only opens at night. This is my treat." Irene and the others slipped away quickly. On the way, they suddenly remembered something. Finally, when they returned to the residence, only she and Carter were left. "Well, indeed, quite ordinary." Carter coughed twice. "I don't know your family. My mother died a long time ago. I found a job for my father in the theater." "It's all easy chores," May said calmly. "But I think he will come back at night." This small bungalow was located in a deep alley in the inner city. It was bought with all her savings after she became the star of the western region. Although the house was small and old, moving away from the outer city would at least prevent her from being harassed and spied on. Sorry. "Nothing." May also poured herself a small cup. "Did His Highness send you here to rectify the order of the theater and solve the dispute among the actors?" "No, of course not." Carter repeatedly waved his hands and said, "Timothy has sent people to cause trouble in the Western Territory again. His Highness Roland is on the way here with the main army. I just took the little town and arrived first. I arranged for the Second Army to strengthen the night watch, and while I was at it, let the Honeysuckle family be more vigilant, in order to prevent any sneak attacks on the city gate and so on." "You shouldn't have told me these things." May was startled and then shook her head. "You asked, and it's not a secret operation." Carter gulped down the wine. "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." "All right," she said, pursing her lips. "So how did you get into the theater?" "After I handed over the task, I suddenly saw the advertisement for the play you acted in, so I wanted to see what you would look like on the real stage." The result was just as I imagined. Although I only saw the end, your performance was really wonderful." The knight exclaimed, "So I went backstage to invite you for a drink, but I didn't know whether I should go in or not, so I lingered at the door for a while until I heard the argument inside." "You've been outside for a long time?" May frowned. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop." Carter raised his hands. "It was just an accident, I promise." Pfft, she couldn't help but chuckle. "I didn't blame you. You don't have to look like that." "Is that so?" The knight breathed a sigh of relief and reached for the wine, but she slapped his hand down. "You still have a task tonight, right?" May shook her finger. "So you can only drink a small cup, no more." "But..." She smiled. "When this mission is over, you can treat me properly." After Carter left, May filled her glass again, leaned back in the chair, and sipped. Since the last time she tasted the white wine, she found that she gradually liked this hot and mellow taste. As for Carter's previous invitation, she already had a vague answer in her heart. Some things could only be known after trying, just like the white wine in her hand. Although it was hard to swallow at first, the mellow taste was not something that sweet and sour fruit wine or bland ale could compare to. "Why don't I bring my father back to town and settle down after this play is over?" 2 days later, Roland arrived at Longsong Stronghold. Perot Hall and the members of the 5 families went out of the city to welcome His Royal Highness troops. After the First Army was stationed in Longsong Stronghold, Roland went straight to the castle and held a brief meeting. "I've received reliable news that Timothy has sent an army to Longsong Stronghold." He sat in the main seat of the hall, looking down at the nobles below. I don't know their number and route, but there's no doubt that they're coming for me. According to Timothy's usual style, they're bound to expand their troops by kidnapping civilians, and then use drugs to force these people to attack. Excuse me, Your Highness, Viscount Eric of the Wolf family was puzzled. The drug you're talking about is... It's an evil red pill that can make civilians more powerful than a knight, but after the effect is over, the people who take it can only struggle helplessly to death. Except for Perrault, the other 4 families didn't know about the church's secret drug, so Roland simply explained its characteristics and origin. Timothy intends to use this method to continuously weaken the resistance of the western region. Any population he doesn't need will be the target of kidnapping, and your territories are also included in this list. As the guardian of the western region, I ask you to move all your family members and territory civilians into the city, so as not to expand Timothy's troops. But, the food and stored goods in our warehouse, move as much as you can, Roland resolutely interrupted. I'll only give you 3 days, the surrounding civilians must gather in Longsong stronghold. After I've repelled Timothy's troops, I'll naturally let you go. After the meeting, the prince summoned Iron Axe into the castle. In fact, he didn't reveal the true situation to the nobles. Under the carpet investigation of Lightning and Maggie, the team from King's City had already been exposed. Unlike the previous group of invaders, they were riding a single-masted sailboat and were heading west along the main Redwater River, passing through Willow Town to enter the hinterland of the western region. This was a very tricky route. When the enemy crossed the fork, they could either turn back along the tributary to attack the south and east gates of Longsong stronghold, or continue westward to Border Town. In order to avoid splitting his troops to defend, he had to take the initiative to concentrate his superior forces and defeat the enemy at one point. Chapter 280. After entering the hall, Iron Axe performed a standard military salute. Timothy's troops are expected to arrive at the fork of the Redwater River in 4 days, so the First Army will set off this afternoon, Roland straightforwardly ordered. The troops stationed in Border Town will meet with you at the location where the attack will take place. I will also rush over as soon as possible. Doesn't Border Town need to be defended? All the enemy's movements are under the surveillance of Lightning and Maggie, so there is no need to divide the troops to defend. We just need to go to one place and defeat them. The prince paused. And Longsong stronghold needs to leave 100 people to guard the nobles. Stay here. Iron Axe was slightly startled. Roland briefly explained the previous orders issued to the 5 families. The reason why I gathered them is to make it convenient for them to guard. After knowing that Timothy is attacking the western region, I can't guarantee that someone will have any ideas. The Second Army's weapons are old and they lack combat experience, so they may not be able to react in time. But with the addition of 10 teams of First Army soldiers, we can ensure that they won't be able to stir up any trouble. I don't want any trouble to happen while we are fighting at the fork of the Redwater River. Yes, Your Highness, he replied. Are you going too? After Iron Axe left, Nightingale appeared from behind the main seat. Of course, Roland said, if I don't go, who else can use Lotus's ability? I may not be good at commanding, but blocking the road with a bunker and slapping the face with a tank, those are my unique skills. I know about the bunker, but what is a tank? Nightingale looked confused. Well, it's a carriage that drags the artillery, the prince coughed twice, but we don't have enough horses, so the artillery needs to be transported by Little Town, so it can't be called a tank. Is that why you chose Honey? She blinked. As far as I know, she can tame tigers and leopards to be as docile as horses. But can a cannon pulled by a beast also be called a tank? Of course, Roland couldn't help but raise the corner of his mouth. It can also be called a tiger or a leopard. Just then, Carter came in with a white-tailed kite in his arms. Your Highness, there is news from Border Town. Roland clapped his hands, and the white-tailed kite spread its wings as if it had a mind of its own, broke free from the knight's arms, and soared into the sky. After gliding for a distance, it landed steadily on his shoulder. He took out a piece of jerky from his pocket and asked the bird to swallow it. The bird even raised one of its claws so that he could untie the cloth. This eagle was not Maggie, but one of the air messengers trained by Honey. They could remember 5 to 6 different people and hundreds of flight routes. As long as they were brought to an unfamiliar place, they would be able to establish a connection with the homing nest. This time, Roland brought a total of 4 messengers to the fortress. They could travel back and forth within 2 hours and fly for an entire day without stopping. In a situation where there was no radio, this was the fastest way to communicate. Roland spread out the letter wrapped in a cloth and quickly skimmed through it. The sender was Vendi. According to his request, she had taken Lotus, Sylvie, Leaf, Hummingbird, and Nana to the fork of the Redwater River. Along with the ship were some members of the artillery team and 8 cannons. This was also the maximum number of cannons that could be accommodated on the deck of Little Town. The prince estimated that when Vendi pushed the sail forward at full speed, it would take a day for the cement ship to reach its destination. Although Sylvie acted as a navigator and the ship could travel at night, Vendi's magic power was far less abundant than Anna's, so it was impossible for her to continuously use her ability. So if they rested at night and transported during the day, they could only make 2 round trips in 4 days. At most, they could transport 16 field cannons to the fork of the river. Although the number of cannons was less than in the last battle, considering the surprise attack and the fact that the other side could not quickly launch a counterattack, the artillery was barely enough. Roland took the pen and paper handed over by Nightingale and wrote down new instructions. He ordered the garrison troops to carry weapons and ammunition and immediately set off, converging with Iron Axe's main force at the fork of the river. It would only take half an hour for the white-tailed kite to deliver the letter to Scroll, who would then pass it on to Captain Brian. When Roland arrived at the scheduled location, it was already the next morning. The sparkling river was exactly here, divided into 2, one flowing towards Longsong Stronghold, and the other connecting to Redwater City. Because the latter river was wider, people used to regard it as the main channel of the Redwater River, while the one leading to Longsong Stronghold was called Little Redwater. After disembarking, the witches who had been waiting for a long time by the river came to greet them. "Where is Vendi?" Roland looked around and asked. "She returned by Little Town at dawn," Leaf said. "She said that there is still a batch of artillery to be delivered." "I heard that you want to deal with Timothy Wimbledon, the false king who hunts witches in the city every day." Lotus asked impatiently, "What do you want us to do?" Although Iron Axe and the main force of the First Army had not yet arrived, but the preparation work could be carried out in advance, as long as there were witches. "I need to establish a line of defense on both sides of the main river." He squatted down and drew a simple diagram with a stone. "If this line represents the enemy's route of advance, then my troops will be distributed on both sides, and will suddenly launch a pincer attack. In order to achieve the effect of surprise, they must first hide. Therefore, you have to raise 2 mud houses on the shore, forming a V-shaped angle. The houses should be long, the walls must be thick, and the inside should be divided into 8 compartments, leaving only a small window on the side facing the Redwater River." "Your Highness, I don't quite understand." Lotus was puzzled. "You can hide the soldiers in the mud houses to hide their whereabouts, but they also can't attack the ships on the river. What if the false king's fleet doesn't stop, nor does it reach the shore, and continues to sail all the way?" "No, they can't pass," Roland smiled. "You will know when the time comes." Then he looked at Leaf. "You are responsible for covering these fortifications. Weeds and vines will do, make them look more natural." "Yes," Leaf replied. In this way, when the artillery was pushed into the camouflaged fortifications, the 2 mud houses, which seemed useless in Lotus' eyes, would instantly transform into unsinkable, sailing battleships. At that time, as long as the baffles on the windows were opened, each compartment would be able to spit out a deadly flame, and the 16 field artillery would not lose their aim because of the turbulence. In fact, at such a close range, they could almost hit the sailing ships sailing in the middle of the river with their eyes closed, and even if they couldn't sink them, it would be enough to turn their decks into a Shura battlefield. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.